Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Bruville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Thadier. Monsieur le deputy Luce.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Doublé. Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Lehegara.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ayer. Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham. Madame le deputy Moore. Monsieur le deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph. Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Poré. Monsieur le deputy Wall. Madame le deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Renouf.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Jeune. Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howe.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Présent.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération étant accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple qu'il te plut de commettre à leur soin. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous ennuie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le deputy Southern.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Thadier.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Doublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Moore.
Defoe.
Monsieur le deputy Joseph.
Ma'am, due to recent bereavements, I wonder if Deputy Overton might excuse.
Do members agree that Deputy Joseph should be marked excusé? Excusez.
Monsieur le Deputy Ward.
Default. Les États sont constitués. We recommenced this morning with the first item of business, which is returning to the proposition brought by Deputy Balash, a vote of no confidence in the chair of the Health and Social Security Panel, P7 of 2023. As agreed yesterday evening by the presiding officer, the first speaker this morning will be Deputy Southern. So I call upon Deputy Southern to speak.
Thank you, Ma'am. I remember to got it right for the first time in many a year. Members will be glad to hear that this debate is coming to an end. Penultimate contribution from me, and then one further statement, and we can all make our minds up what we want to happen. And as on many occasions, whenever I'm in doubt, I go back to basics. And the basics are that a complaint has been made. A complaint about the behaviour and attitudes of two of the members of my panel, my scrutiny panel. And although the Health Minister can't talk today, I can talk on her behalf. I've had an extensive conversation with her, and the words she uses is, my officers feel browbeaten by the attitudes and the behaviours taken by two of my members. That's not going to go away. Unless, of course, you vote against the no confidence motion, and then I will be able to get on with my business. I could form a three-person panel almost overnight, I think. I've sounded people out. And we could get on with our duty to conduct proper scrutiny. So a complaint has been made. And I'll just read from the letter, because that's the basics. In our private meeting with Professor Massey Taylor on Thursday, the 1st of December, 2022, which was held prior to a quarterly hearing the same day, you will recall that we discussed the Professor's appointment to the newly created Chair of Health and Care Board. During the private meeting, I was asked about the appointment of Professor Massey Taylor, and was asked if I had encouraged him to apply for the role. I confirmed that I had suggested that Professor Massey may wish to consider applying for the role, considering his wealth of experience and knowledge of global health systems and the issues facing our health service. In the public meeting that followed, immediately followed, public meeting, the previous one was private, Deputy Ward then referenced this discussion clearly, and the matter was then reported on in the media and led to questions in the chamber. While I have no issue with the above being known and reported on, it is how it came to be made public, with which I'm concerned. And the phrase used by a member of my panel, could the fact, on your own admission, that you did encourage Professor Massey Taylor into applying for the post, that maybe skewed the independence of your position as making that final decision. And it appears to be a game of words. I would use the word, not bullying this time, but innuendo. Was that a decision made independently, or are you really not up to it? Are you just picking a favourite? That's the innuendo contained in that phrase. And that's what people often object to. Elsewhere in the complaint, on Thursday, the 2nd of February 2023, in a private meeting, again a private meeting, Sorry, I've just lost me. In a private meeting, yes, with myself and my officers, I feel bound to write to you and strongly convey my concerns as part of my own duties as a minister and a States member. As you know, and for the sake of posterity, I requested that my chief officer withdraw from the meeting as I found the deputy's behaviour wholly inappropriate of a person holding public office, and that officers should not be subject to what I considered to be a disrespect from the deputy. I consider that the deputy's behaviour in no way upheld the requirement to maintain the integrity of the States, nor did the deputy fulfil the requirement to promote and demonstrate leadership. Instead, the deputy felt it appropriate to talk to the chief officer in such a way that the deputy disrespected the chief officer's right to be treated with dignity and respect at work under the States of Jersey codes of practice. The deputy's behaviour also clearly infringed on those same rights as those more junior civil servants who accompanied me to and the chief officer to brief the panel. As you know, one of my priorities is to address poor behaviour and culture within HCS. And so when we as States members are unable to act as standard bearers for model behaviour, it makes this challenge more difficult. Accountability and scrutiny can be, in my view, can be conducted in a way that is respectful and dignified. And that's what I have tried to do, turning to myself, for the past 23 years. And I believe, by and large, I've met those standards. The complaint has been made yesterday. What happened to the complaint? Why was the complaint not taken to the liaison committee? And the answer is, it was, and it was discussed at the liaison committee. The question arises, why was this not put before the Commissioner for Standards? And the answer was, the Commissioner for Standards had been recently appointed, but was not in place. The question then arises, but if this complaint was to go to the Commissioner of Standards, how long would it take to get a ruling from the Commissioner? Surely some days, perhaps weeks, before it would. In which case it would be sitting there, hanging over the work of the scrutiny panel for some time. That's the case. If you decide that you wish to vote for a motion of no confidence in me, then albeit, do so. But if you think that the circumstances of this particular case are such that you wish to vote against the motion of no confidence in me, then please do so. I would encourage people, nice word, encourage people, to vote one way or the other to make sure we get a clear decision out of this process today. And with that, I encourage people to vote anyway. Thank you.
Deputy Scott, I saw your light on. Do you
Yes, ma'am, just a point of clarification. Because
Sorry, do you give way for a point of clarification, Deputy Southern? Very well. Then that draws the debate to
Mark,
sorry.
Could I ask a point of order?
Yes.
It's a point of order about removal of members of a panel. Don't know if I can ask it. I can't just see it in standing orders. Does a chair of a panel have the ability or power to remove, in the way just suggested, members of their panel?
No, there is no facility within standing orders for a panel member to be removed. The members are approved by this assembly. What would normally happen is that members choose to resign, to step down from the panel if the relationship reaches a point of no return, but there is nothing in standing orders that requires members to resign, and similarly, the chair has no power to ask members to resign. That then,
Can I leave therefore on Deputy Moore, Deputy Ward,
members
please?
content to raise the depot on Deputy Ward, therefore is raised.
Moore and Ward.
Oh, sorry, and Deputy Moore. That draws to an end the debate. I call upon Deputy Balash to reply.
Madam, I can understand some members' frustration with this debate and their wish that it would just all go away. But there is an important principle at stake. And that principle is the right of scrutiny panels to carry out their work fearlessly and without interference from the executive. I have tried hard to avoid this debate. On receipt of the letter from the Minister, one might have hoped that Deputy Southern would have discussed the matter with his Vice Chair, but he did not. If I had not approached him, I don't think we would have had a discussion at all. One might have hoped that he would have done any number of things, getting the parties together around a table in order to try to resolve matters and understand the problem, or going to the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, for example. After Deputy Gorst's wise intervention yesterday, one might have wished for some form of conciliation from Deputy Southern. I would have accepted the terms set out by Deputy Gorst and withdrawn the proposition. It is pretty much indeed what I suggested to Deputy Southern at our meeting. I asked Deputy Southern after yesterday's sitting if he wanted to do a deal, but the proposal was dismissed out of hand. It takes two to tango. You cannot negotiate with someone who is unwilling to compromise. And to those who say withdraw the proposition without any corresponding move from Deputy Southern, I respond, that solves nothing. The impasse continues. Deputy Southern has clearly made up his mind that trust has broken down between the Minister and the panel. That is indeed what he said. The Minister's letter dropped into fertile ground in Deputy Southern's mind. It is a pity that the Minister did not speak, and correct me, ma'am, if she was advised not to speak. My understanding was that she was advised not to vote, but that she was able to speak if she wished.
That's absolutely right, Deputy.
It's a pity she did not speak, because it would have been useful, I think, to hear her response to some very relevant questions from Deputy Tom Binney. Did she want Deputy Southern to react in this way? Had she discussed it with him beforehand? Was there some kind of a plan that Deputies Ward and Howell should be removed from the scrutiny panel so that it could be reshaped? The letter had obviously been crafted with great care and lots of footnotes. If that is the case, there is certainly work to be done, because I, for one, am not prepared to see the scrutiny panel moulded to the wishes of the Minister and good members chased off for no good reason. With some honourable exceptions, Madam, the government's reaction to this debate has been disappointing. Neither the Chief Minister, nor the Deputy Chief Minister, nor either of the ministers involved with the panel has chosen to speak. They seem to have decided that it is an internal scrutiny squabble and sat back and washed their hands of the whole matter. That seems to me a pity. Does not the government have an interest in vibrant and effective scrutiny? Does it really want scrutiny panels chosen by the chair as Deputy Southern wishes, so that they become pale shadows of their leader and may be dominated by a particular party? Do they really want panel members docilely to toe the party line? I begin to sound a bit like, ma'am, another backbencher who said, and I quote from Hansard on the 10th of December 2020, "It is perhaps part of our DNA, but stirring things up is another way of describing holding others to account." Who was that backbencher? It was, of course, the Chief Minister. In the course, then Senator Moore, in the course of another no-confidence debate. How sad that perceptions change when one achieves power. She was right then, and I'm afraid wrong now. Stirring things up is sometimes necessary to hold ministers and officials to account. That is what Deputies Ward and Howell have done, and what they should continue to do. That is not to say, and I can't emphasize this strongly enough, that breaches of the Code of Conduct and the Code of Practice are acceptable. They are not. Members and their officials are entitled to be treated with the respect that is due to any human being. I do not believe that the codes have been broken, and I accept the point made by Deputy Lehegara and others that it is difficult for members to resolve conflicts of evidence when they were not present at the meetings. But I also think that Deputy Luce was quite right to ask rhetorically, is there sufficient evidence of bad behaviour to require the two deputies to resign? That's the real question. The burden of proof seems to me to be on those making the assertion. Deputy Southern, in his speech just now, spoke about the alleged breach of confidence from a private meeting. I can't do more than repeat what I have put in my report. There was no breach. The matter was put into the public domain, first of all, by the Minister herself, and she was then questioned by Deputy Ward. There was no breach of the confidence of a private meeting. There are some rather non-specific allegations in the letter. Deputy Howell allegedly subjected officers to, and I quote, clear vitriol and disrespect. Those are strong words. Vitriol is defined in the dictionary as acrimonious or scathing speech. But what did Deputy Howell actually say? We don't know, because it was not explained in the letter and the Minister has not spoken. I was there, and I can only say that I heard no vitriol. The Minister requested her Chief Officer to withdraw for the sake of posterity, whatever that means. I doubt very much whether posterity will be interested in the affairs of this particular scrutiny panel. But the Minister said that her Chief Officer was asked to withdraw because Deputy Howell's behaviour, and again I quote, was wholly inappropriate for a person holding public office. But in what way? What did she actually do? These vague and non-specific allegations are awfully easy to make and not so easy to rebut. But they are not, I suggest, sufficient evidence of bad behaviour to demand resignations from the panel. Scrutiny panels are appointed by the Assembly. It is not open to chairs of scrutiny panels to seek to dismiss members of the panel. I told members when I opened this debate that I had seen nothing which, in my opinion, amounted to inappropriate questioning from the two deputies of the Minister or her officials. Firm questioning, yes. Persistent questioning, yes. Both the deputies may have strong views, but people who stir things up make you think. If you are open-minded to people who challenge you, you are compelled to look at things from a different point of view. That ought to be constructive for the Minister and her officials. None of that also should be a problem for a competent chair. Deputy Southern has, I'm afraid, grossly exaggerated the conduct of the two deputies to justify his position. I don't believe that the relationship between the Minister and the scrutiny panel is broken or beyond repair. Between sensible and moderate people, it is always possible to find common ground and to find an accommodation. The letter sent by the Minister was, as I have said before, a misjudgment. It should not have been written. It should be withdrawn. It is always better to talk. If you talk, you can usually find a solution. So how should Deputy Southern have reacted to the Minister's letter? Should he have run away from the problem and tried to push the deputies off the panel, as he did? Or should he have tried to address the issues by discussion and persuasion? I have no confidence in a chair who chooses the former, and I move the proposition.
Do you call for the Powell, Deputy? You call for the Powell. Very well, the appel has been called for. I ask members to return to their seats. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have now had an opportunity to cast their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the proposition has been carried. There were 17 votes in favour, 15 votes contre and 14 abstentions.
Can we have all the names, please, ma'am?
Greffier.
Those members voting pour, the Connaught Arbor, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St Martin, Grouville, St Juan, St Mary and St Saviour, and deputies Labby, Luce, Ayer, Badash, Scott, Rose Binney, Hal, Tom Binney and Barbara Ward. Those members voting contre, the Connaught Arbor St Helier, deputies Southern, Lehegara, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mezek, Coles, Porre, Catherine Curtis, Kovac, Alex Curtis, Andrews, Tadier and Feltham, and those members who abstained, the Connaught Arbor St Lawrence, St John and St Clement, and deputies Doublé, Morel, Gardner, Gorst, Moore, War, Miles, Renouf, Jearn, Ferry and Stevenson.
Very well. We move on to the next item of business, which is the establishment of a Climate Council, P117 of 2022, lodged by the Minister for the Environment, and the main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Panel. There is an amendment lodged by Deputy Coles of St Helier. Minister, do you accept this amendment? I understand that Deputy Jearn is acting as rapporteur for this item.
Yes, ma'am, we accept this amendment, yes, we've accepted this amendment, and we discussed with Deputy Coles whether to split it.
Is it part A of part B of the amendment that you accept?
We're accepting part B, but opposing part A. Yes.
Do you wish to have the proposition read as amended by part B?
Yes. Yes.
Then Greffier, if you could read the proposition as amended, including part B, but not part A.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, in accordance with the amendment made by the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel to the Carbon Neutral Roadmap, agreed on the 29th of April 2022, to approve the establishment of a Climate Council for Jersey with terms of reference and membership as set out in the report. Except that on page 4, after the words States Assembly, there should be inserted the words, the Council will consider and advise on carbon sequestrating initiatives that would be applicable to Jersey.
Deputy Jearn.
Thank you, ma'am. The proposed new Climate Council will provide independent, science-based advice on setting and meeting carbon budgets and preparing for climate change. The Independent Council will report on and evaluate the Government of Jersey's progress on reducing carbon emissions and the climate change policy initiatives being delivered by the Carbon Neutral Roadmap. In developing the terms of reference for the Climate Council, I considered that they should be proportional to the size of the island to maintain maximum efficiency with minimum overheads. Therefore, it is intended that the Council will present a report to the States Assembly at the end of every 4-year delivery phase for the term of the roadmap up to 2050. In simple terms, providing an end-of-term report. The first 4-yearly report from the Climate Council will need to be signed off and presented to the States Assembly by the end of Q1 2026. The Council will be made up of 5 members. At least one must be a full-time Jersey resident, covering areas of expertise in energy, economics, climate technology, and income inequality and just transition. For those members unfamiliar with this term, it means the process of shifting to a low or zero carbon economy in a fair and just manner so that no sector of the community is disproportionately impacted. This is one of the 5 principles underpinning the Carbon Neutral Roadmap. The Council is estimated to cost between £40,000 to £60,000, incurred every 4 years. As this proposal was brought forward as an amendment from the previous Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel with no specific budget line, the cost of the 2026 Council will come from the Climate Emergency Fund via reallocation of funds. Future costs of the Council will be considered as part of the long-term financing strategy that we have started to develop. The key performance indicator for overall success of the Carbon Neutral Roadmap is the island's annual greenhouse gas inventory, which is reported on annually. I will not be opposing Part B of the amendment to the amendment. However, it needs to be acknowledged that the use of the term sequestrating in the amendment is inaccurate, but that its meaning is still clear in this context. As an independent body, the Council will have the opportunity to determine for itself where its attention and efforts are best placed, which means that the carbon sequestration would not be given additional weight on consideration over other carbon neutral roadmap policies, such as heating, transport and sustainable finance. I commend the proposition as amended to the Assembly. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded? As we said, there is an amendment lodged by Deputy Coles of St Helier South to Part A of the proposition, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
After the words set out in the report, insert the words, except that. The delivery phase for the Climate Council should be 2 years instead of 4 years, with all references to the four-year delivery phase amended accordingly.
Deputy Coles.
Thank you, Mum. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Minister and the Assistant Minister for their acceptance of the second part of my amendment. Carbon sequestration is an important part of our efforts on our impact on the climate emission, on our impact on our carbon emissions for climate change. I'd also like to just point out that this amendment is not intended in any way, shape or form to devalue, discredit or any attempt with the Climate Council. It is an incredibly important incredibly important initiative that we need to maintain and continue on our roadmap to ensure to get into net zero as quickly as possible. So why do I consider every 4 years is too long for the report to be produced? With the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change meeting every year, it is important that we stay on top of any changes and be involved in any new developments that these conventions bring. Being prepared to change earlier in a political term rather than waiting until a new government is elected seems more logical. We must also consider that a number of the initiatives and incentives have a financial implication. Would it not be better for us to measure twice and cut once before spending money which might be in the wrong direction? We also have to consider that technology and technologies and developments move very quickly, and we don't want to fall behind and choose the wrong initiatives. When we look at things like, sorry, I'm losing myself. When we look at things like the electric car, is the electric car the best way forward? Are we going to spend money on initiatives like improving our infrastructure to be able to charge electric cars around the island? Or whether actually something like the hydrogen fuel cell might overtake this within that 4-year period and actually save us money on the infrastructure for electric cars and actually develop it towards more hydrogen effective vehicles. There is also considerations that actually we are producing alternatives for fossil fuels like biodiesel and synthetic fuels. It might be considered that one of these takes a bigger shift within that 4-year terms, but biodiesels and synthetic fuels may require different storage parameters, and therefore we may need to shift how we're looking at storing these fuels. I also then look at the recruitment and retention around this Climate Council, as it is important that we maintain consistency. But with the Council meeting every 4 years, it is possible that members, even accidentally, may find themselves unable to commit from one Council term to another, or choose not to return for the following 4 years report. This would lead to another recruitment process, which would add additional costs and potentially impact the completion of the report on its 4-yearly basis. Surely we want consistency on this Council. It is important to note as well, as the Minister for Energy and Climate Change mentioned, that there are key performance indicators which are being collected. That means the department is collecting data throughout at regular intervals throughout the year to ensure that their KPIs are actually being adhered to. And so this is not just on a 4-yearly basis. So the data would be available to be reviewed every 2 years as well. I had been considered to whether or not to actually bring this for the Council to review every year. However, I just deemed that may be too regular. But 4 years, for me, just seems too long a period between reports to make sure that we are progressing in the right way. And so I compromised within myself to actually think that maybe 2 years was better. Though I acknowledge that 4 years was the recommendation brought forward by the previous Assembly, we do have to remember that we are now a new Assembly, and we do have the right to make adjustments where we feel that they are required. And for me, this is one of those fields where I believe a shortened period is preferable to the 4 year. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded? Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Luce.
Thank you, Ma'am, and I'll speak very briefly, if I may, because I'll have a little bit more to say when we get to the main proposition. But I'd just like to say that my scrutiny panel looked into this issue along with all the other issues around Climate Council. On the 30th of November last year, we met the Minister, and on this particular subject, it was explained that at the end of every 4 years, the Climate Council will independently report and evaluate the Government of Jersey's progress on reducing carbon emissions and the climate change policy initiatives being delivered in the carbon neutral roadmap. But members need to remember, and as Deputy Coles has just said, the data and statistics will also have to be reported back to the UK on an annual basis. So the data there to inform a review will be available every 12 months. Nevertheless, my panel asked the Assistant Minister if she deemed a 4 year reporting schedule was sufficient, to which it was explained that it was, in her view, acceptable, and that a complete report would be produced by the Climate Council every 4 years. She felt that annually would potentially make life more difficult for them, and it was explained that reporting every 4 years would be a way of keeping, and I quote, each government, holding the government to account. But the question I would have, is there any, or is it possible to hold a government to account right at the end of their term? And if they haven't done a particularly good job for 4 years, it's a bit late to try to change their views. The first report is due to be produced, if this debate goes ahead today, just before the end of the term of this current government. But on my personal note, and this is not the view of the panel, but on my personal note, I think Deputy Coles brings a good point to the Assembly today. We have declared a climate emergency. We do know our weather is changing dramatically. We do know we need to act. And I would like members to consider whether coming back with a report on how we're doing every 4 years is frequent enough. Thank you, Mum.
Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, Ma'am. If I may start with an observation. Later this year, we have the Rugby World Cup and the Women's Football World Cup. Next year, Paris will host the 2024 Olympics, and in 2026, we have the Men's Football World Cup. And of course, in 2026, we also have an election in Jersey. Perhaps members can see where I'm going with this. All these titanic events have one thing in common. They happen every 4 years. Why could that be? To understand more, I turned to the wisdom of Google, and I found this answer. 4 years is long enough to allow for preparations for the next event, but short enough to keep people interested. And there, in a nutshell, I think you have the reason why the first part of this amendment is, in my view, wrong-headed. The report of the Climate Council needs to feel like an event. It needs to feel special. It needs to be something which government and everyone connected to the carbon neutral strategy is building towards. The idea behind the Climate Council is to provide a review of a 4-year term of government's work towards net zero. It's not a political holding to account. It's a how has that strategy gone? How has the strategy been progressed? Has it done what it was supposed to do? The idea behind the Climate Council is to provide a review of a 4-year term of government's work towards net zero. And it will highlight areas where there might have been difficulties and suggest ways to improve. It's not intended to help fine-tune government strategy as it goes along, for the very good reason we already have those mechanisms in place. We have them internally in government, and we have them politically through scrutiny and through this assembly. And of course, we have them publicly in that the media and social media are continually holding us to account. The idea of a 2-year review seems to be born of a slightly neurotic fear, a lack of confidence even, that without outside help, this assembly will be unable to do the job of holding government to account. Or that we might somehow miss some tectonic shift in the technologies leading to net zero. I reject that. I believe that scrutiny and this assembly and the media and the public are capable of interrogating what we're doing, holding us to account, and if there are new ideas coming through, we'll certainly get to hear about them. Our whole net zero strategy is built on engagement, openness, and accountability. We want to move together. But it's not just that a review every 2 years is unnecessary. I think it's also damaging. Just as with a major sporting event or an election, there will need to be a lot of preparation. The Climate Council will need support. First, people will have to be recruited, and we cannot guarantee, for the same reasons as Deputy Coles talks about 4 years, we cannot guarantee that those who are available for one review will be available in 2 years' time for a second. That won't matter so much for a 4-year end-of-term review, but it might matter for a mid-term review where continuity of recommendations would be important. Officer time will have to be spent servicing the Council. Information has to be provided, papers written, officers made available for questioning, which also takes preparation. And of course it would cost money, another 50,000 on top of the approximately 50,000 we estimate it would cost for the 4-year review. The difference between a 2-year and a 4-year review is that a 2-year review pitches you into a near continuous cycle of reviewing. Attention is continually diverted from the task you're trying to accomplish to the review of the task you're trying to accomplish. We are not a big island. We do not have a huge army of civil servants to deploy to make net zero happen. Yet solving many of the challenges poses the same difficulties here as they do for a much larger jurisdiction. One example, the UK has now had 2 big attempts at launching schemes to help with home heating. Just a week or so ago, a £450 million scheme to encourage households in England and Wales to upgrade their gas boilers to heat pumps and other low-carbon alternatives was condemned for failing to deliver after suffering a, quote, disappointingly low take-up. Less than a third of the money available has been used in the first year of operation. That comes after the failure of the previous scheme in 2021, when the government scrapped its flagship £1.4 billion Green Homes grant scheme, the centrepiece of Boris Johnson's promise to build back greener from the COVID-19 pandemic, just over 6 months after its launch. So we know it's difficult, and we know we have to do it better than that. And I know it's fashionable in this instant gratification world where a rush to judgment via social media is sometimes the default position. But doing net zero means sweating the details. It's a long-term business. I would rather spend a few months more getting it right rather than risk discrediting the net zero journey with a flawed and badly thought out scheme. That would distract time and energy from delivery. The temptation will be to get something out of the door quickly, to demonstrate progress rather than to get it right. That kind of how are you getting on with delivery of what you've promised scrutiny is a job best done by scrutiny and by this assembly, not a climate council. The central point I would make is this. A climate council meeting every 2 years will do more to hinder the journey to net zero than to speed it up. What we have at the moment is a hierarchy of oversight. We have day-to-day, or rather month-to-month, oversight within government. We have quarterly scrutiny meetings at which political oversight is exercised. And I have to say that there is a considerable degree of expertise and knowledge in that scrutiny panel. Then in the Assembly, ministers can be questioned every 3 weeks on any aspect of our carbon neutral strategy. Propositions can be brought if it is felt that we are on the wrong track. And then finally, at the end of a 4-year term of government, there is a natural moment for us to ask in outside experts and look at the whole programme in the round and say, okay, how did they do? And is there anything that could be done better by the next government, the Climate Council? So for me, the 4-year cycle makes perfect sense. It fits with our electoral cycle, and it fits with the psychology of making the Climate Council a big moment, something that matters, something that we build towards, not something that is part of business as usual. So I urge members to vote against this part of the amendment. Now, the second part of the amendment is one we've accepted, but I do just want to say a few words about it. We've accepted it on the basis that it changes very little. The Climate Council, as Deputy Jern has said, would already have been considering carbon sequestration because it is part of the carbon neutral roadmap. And you can take two views about an amendment that makes no difference. One would be to argue against it because it's pointless, but then the counter-argument would be, well, if it doesn't change anything, why are you arguing against it? And that's what we've gone with. However, it might just help members if I explain a little bit about the approach we're taking to carbon sequestration. So let me spell out where we are. First of all, there are three main routes to sequester carbon.
Deputy, I'm loath to interrupt you,
okay.
but in discussing but this is the debate on the amendment on
okay,
Part
I beg
A,
your
so
pardon.
Part B was perhaps
Part B is
better
already
for the main
moved on.
debate.
I beg your pardon.
Well, it's points you can raise in the main debate.
Yes, indeed. So in that case, I will rest the argument with the point that the Climate Council should be something that feels important, something that is something that we build towards, something that doesn't feel like it's something we have to prepare for on a continuous basis. And I think on that basis, it can make a really valuable contribution because it will be bringing in outside expertise to review progress over a period of time, rather than trying to fine-tune and provide that scrutiny that is already present in this Assembly, already present from public opinion, and already present in scrutiny. The two things feel complementary to me: a 4-year cycle for the Climate Council and regular scrutiny from within this Assembly. Thank you very much.
Councillor St Brelard.
Thank you, ma'am. And I rise really to make the point that in the last term, the Environment Scrutiny Panel did bring exactly the proposition that the Deputy is bringing today, that a Climate Council be formed, and that was amended by the Minister of the day back to 4 years. We proposed initially 2, he amended it back to 4. And in that debate, which was debated in the chamber here, that was accepted as being a pragmatic solution, which the Minister has just outlined. So I don't really see the point in going over old ground again, and I think the proposition by the Minister is perfectly acceptable. I'm not sure if the Deputy was aware this has already been debated at length in the last term. Thank you, ma'am.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I can't help feeling that the Minister is making very heavy weather of this. And he started off his debate by basically saying, in order to find out whether 4 years was better than 2, I Googled why the Olympics and the World Cup is held every 4 years. And Google told me that it's so that they have enough time to prepare for those events. But there's a key difference here, that those are massive international sporting events that happen every 4 years, involving hundreds of countries potentially, and thousands of competitors and millions of viewers. We're talking about a climate change council based in Jersey, which will meet either every 2 or 4 years. And it seems to me that we can't underestimate the importance of climate change. And I also suspect that as the consequences of climate change become more and more visible year on year and even month on month, that people are going to start to panic. I think that the penny is only starting to drop but it should have dropped, of course, 40 or 50 years ago. And are we really debating whether we want to wait 4 years in between each meeting of the Climate Council, when actually climate is one of the universal crises that not just Jersey is facing, but that the whole world is facing? The Minister seems to have adopted very quickly the politics of the Chicken Licken political party. I almost thought I might be listening to Jersey's first Chief Minister when I heard him, a fellow St. Brelard former politician, when he says words like neurotic, damaging, discrediting, and flawed and wrong-headed, when in fact all that the Deputy Coles is trying to do, and I know from working closely with Deputy Coles about his green credentials and how much he cares passionately about all things environmental, that he wants to see the right outcomes for Jersey. There was a strange argument, I think, when Deputy Renouf, the Minister for Environment, said that he wanted more continuity, and he came to what I think must be the wrong conclusion, to say that if you want continuity, you're more likely to get it on a 4-year cycle of meetings than on a 2-year, because those individuals will be able to be the same every 4 years. But if it's every 2 years that these people are required to meet, they're less likely to be the same people. I mean, how on earth does that logic stack up? Because surely if you want continuity, you have more regular meetings or more frequent meetings. And it seems to me that in a 4-year cycle, life is much more likely to get in the way, isn't it? So somebody might get a new job, they might move country, they might have ill health. God forbid, they may even die. You know, some people in a 4-year period may not be the same people 4 years later who were at the original Climate Council. But if it's every 2 years, you can probably plan that a bit better. I mean, I'll give a counter example. I'm chair of Le French Festival, as it's called. The Franglais does slightly grate with me, but I didn't choose the name, I inherited it. And we do it every 2 years. We do it every 2 years for exactly the same reasons that Deputy Renouf might have outlined. We do it because every year it's a bit too much. But we want to keep it fresh in people's minds. And we also need time to arrange it. So 2 years seems like a relevant period. But I highlight again, we're not talking about festivals or sporting events here. We're talking about a climate council. So I would finish, Ma'am, by just reading, and I hope that members have read, because I think the conclusion, which is very short, in Deputy Cole's amendment here, and we're only talking about the amendment, is that these amendments will not impede or distract from our goal to be carbon neutral, but it allows us to check progress at more regular intervals and add a necessary term of reference for the Climate Council to consider. And what struck me is, in speaking to that conclusion, is that if the Council are allowed to meet not just once during our terms, so we have 4-year terms of office, as does the government. If indeed the government will last that long, we're not sure. We just effectively had a vote of no confidence in the Chief Minister and Health Minister today, and I'm sure the Chief Minister in waiting, Tom Binney, may have other ideas, so maybe we will see a 2-year cycle for this government and a 2-year for the next. But let's wait and see about that. I digress not too much. But it means that the Climate Council can then have 2 meetings during our term, and it may well be on the first meeting they come out with recommendations and they feed stuff into us. But 2 years later, they realise that the government, or the Assembly indeed, they have been recommending, and so they can then come back after the recommendations have been made and say, actually now we're holding you to account for these, or you are doing certain things really well and we commend you for that, but actually we need to have this public meeting so that we can tell the government and hold the government to account. That seems to me instinctively that it is the better way to do it. So to err on the side of caution, I think it seems much more sensible to have bi-yearly, but 2-year meetings rather than every 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, Mum. Can't help noticing that the St Brellard's representatives have all kind of contributing to this debate. I'm just responding to some of the arguments that I've heard against Deputy Cole's proposition, and which actually I don't really find holding water. So the Minister for Environment, as my colleague Deputy Tadia said, I did find it very strange that there was a comparison with sporting events, because I was thinking, well, why would you compare this with sporting events? Because when it comes to climate change and all the efforts that are being made to try and counter it, there are technological advances, there are world events. It's very different from sport. Sport doesn't change. Okay, maybe the rules of rugby or football might change a little bit, you might wear the odd helmet or something. But this is not so fundamental as some of the things that are going on that can affect the way in which a jurisdiction may wish to counter climate change. So, why is there not a comparison with the government plan, for example, where that kind of the budget gets looked at again and then renewed? So I did find that a really sort of odd way of justifying opposing this amendment. And also there was this argument about, which I think was essentially, well, this is giving more work for the department, more officer time. But I do actually see in the main proposition that a part-time off person is to be recruited. Well, what's that person going to be doing over 4 years? As a part-time person, why wouldn't they be doing? I would have thought they'd have more work to do, or at least the consistency of work to do if it was every 2 years rather than 4 years. And I got, and with my colleague, the Constable St Brelard, where he mentioned that the States Assembly had made a decision before. Well, I have to point out that there's certain decisions of the previous States Assembly that are being reversed even now. So I couldn't really find much of an argument to not support this proposition. And then there was this last little point that really triggered with me, which was the discussion of performance measures, the mention of scrutiny. Anybody been in a scrutiny panel and asked for KPIs, performance measures, not had them, still looking for them? I actually think it's quite useful having a climate council who actually is tasked with looking at performance measures and actually has got to be given them. And maybe it should be government saying, yes, we will give them to you. That is our job. So I'm going to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Jean.
Thank you, Ma'am. The frequency of the Climate Council reports was subject of an amendment to an amendment and subsequently agreed by the last States Assembly in April 2022. That's less than a year ago, as part of the carbon neutral roadmap debate. The agreement was to align the Climate Council at the end of each term of government, as been discussed. Increasing reporting frequency would increase demand on officer time, reducing their capacity to deliver the changes we as government and as an island need to make that will result in emissions reduction. The part-time position is specifically designed to be part-time for 6 months only to support the Climate Council in developing a report rather than meeting. It would be developing a report, not in a post for the full 4 years. Doubling reporting frequency would double the cost of the administration of the council, and this would be between £80,000 to £120,000. As I stated before, there is no specific budget line for the council, so this would have to come from the Climate Emergency Fund via reallocation of funds, diverting further climate emergency funding away from greenhouse gas emission reduction delivery. And I believe that we have robust accountability mechanisms in place to monitor our progress regularly. Progress on Jersey's net zero journey is subject to international scrutiny. The key performance indicators for overall success of the carbon neutral roadmap is the island's annual greenhouse gas inventory, which is reported annually to the United Nations Framework of Convention of Climate Change, UNFCCC. Jersey's emissions inventory will be used to monitor progress in emissions reductions between Climate Council reporting cycles. This international reporting will continue, as is our obligation under the extension of the Paris Agreement. Our emissions inventory is prepared in accordance with international guidance and best practice and is made publicly available via opendata.gov.je for everyone to see. Existing internal governance of the carbon neutral roadmap is robust and sufficient to monitor. Responsibility for the governance and delivery of the policy rests with officers within the operational departments and is overseen by the Carbon Neutral Programme Board and Sponsoring Group. Internal reporting on all policies is completed monthly. Officers provide regular updates on progress to the Environmental Ministerial Team, and the Environmental Ministerial Team updates the Council of Ministers on progress of the Carbon Neutral Roadmap as required. The Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel also offers important oversight of the roadmap progress, and it's falling within their remit. The panel can choose to review the roadmap policies and legislative changes at any point, holding ministers to account for their decisions and actions, and I hope they do so. The role of the States Assembly is also extremely important to hold ministers to account and can question the carbon neutral roadmap progress at any time. So I believe we have robust accountability mechanisms in place to monitor our progress regularly in between these reports that will be every 4 years by the Climate Council. So with all this in mind, I urge state members to reject this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, ma'am, and I will be relatively brief, and it's largely just to point out that what we've just heard doesn't make any sense. We're told simultaneously that there are already a myriad of reporting mechanisms going on, and collating that will all be so difficult to do every 2 years instead of every 4 years. I'm sorry, that just doesn't make sense. If we already have these reporting mechanisms going on frequently, then it surely cannot be that much more difficult to increase the frequency of the Climate Council's meetings, as Deputy Coles pointed out. But we've just heard the Assistant Minister say that due to the extra cost of holding this Climate Council more frequently, that it would double the cost. I challenge that because that doesn't intrinsically sound right to me anyway, but she said that the funding would have to come from the Climate Emergency Fund. Just to be clear to States members, that is not true. We'll have a government plan debate later this year. We can pick whatever funding source we like for it. It does not have to come from that particular fund if we choose it not to. So please don't believe that kind of thing, because that's not how the rules of this Assembly and our budget setting works. I think the Environment Minister's made a mistake in bringing up this comparison with global sporting events like the World Cup, etc., being every 4 years. Does anyone really think that's a reasonable comparison to the work that we're doing? The natures of those two events and the scales of them are totally different. And if you get something wrong in between sporting events, at the end of the day, it's not that big a deal. It just means one future competition might not be as enjoyable as another might be. But if we get into a 4-year term and something goes wrong relatively quickly into it, we'll only have an opportunity to properly analyse it at the end of that 4 years, rather than go for every 2 years and change direction if necessary. That strikes me as making complete sense. We have to remember that this is a climate emergency. Reporting back every 4 years in this way doesn't sound like much of an emergency to me, and I'm reminded of the words of Greta Thunberg, who asks people to consider how you'd respond if your house was on fire, being how we should think about how we respond to the climate crisis, and a 4-year reporting term does not give it the sense of urgency that, frankly, it deserves. 2 years makes absolute perfect sense, so I'll be supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? No other member wishes to speak. Then I close the debate and I call on Deputy Coles to reply.
Thank you, Mum. I'm actually glad that the Environment Minister mentioned the World Cup and the Olympic Games. that are hosted every 4 years. Because between a World Cup and between an Olympic Games, there is the European Championships and there is the Winter Olympics happening so there is a sporting event happening every 2 years because it keeps people interested in the sport and the activities which is going on. And so then I think, okay, these are grand international events, so let's think locally, let's think back to what we do locally. We have the Island Games. These happen every 2 years. It's a biannual event because locally it keeps us interested. And I jest, of course, because when we think of the things like the World Cup, it's actually 6 years in the planning for a World Cup. They're actually appointed 6 years before they're hosted, so the countries have time to develop the infrastructure to build through. So I don't really feel that that argument holds much water in this, because we need to keep people interested. We need to keep working forward. We need to have our actions against climate change monitored and encountered properly. The Minister also mentions about the fact we have the media will keep us in line, scrutiny will keep us in line, the Assembly will keep us in line. So why are we having a council to tell us what we're doing and what we need to do? Because it's supposed to be external, independent advice to keep us on track, to make sure we are doing what the rest of the world believes is in the best interest. Because we are all sometimes very guilty of only seeing what's in front of our own face. So let's have somebody else suggest, point, prod us into the right direction. Make sure we're not wandering off the pathway that we should find ourselves on. And so this is why every 2 years makes more sense. Having a mid-term report gives governments opportunities to admit their mistakes and carry on. Now, this isn't to discredit the current Environment Minister or the Assistant Minister for Energy and Climate Change. In Deputy Jeune, we have someone who is very, very passionate about climate change and somebody who is very much focused and has made a big part of her life the targeting of reducing carbon emissions. So that's fantastic, that's brilliant. Jonathan, Deputy Renouf, is an incredibly meticulous minister. Having spoken to him on a couple of housing matters and other bits and pieces, he is an individual who will take this matter very, very seriously. So I'm not going to say anything that will discredit him in any way, shape or form. But what I am looking for is beyond these two individuals' terms in office. What happens if Deputy Jeune and Deputy Renouf are not re-elected, or if they're not in a government which actually has the same motives moving forward in climate change? We are actually looking beyond where we stand now, because the first report comes at the end of their term. So the next government that comes in, we need to ensure that they are also looking forward and being called out and checked on their work every 2 years to make sure that we do not lose our trajectory. I'd also thank Deputy Scott for her comments regarding the KPIs. As a member of the PAC, we're often asking the question regularly, where is the tracker? Where is this? Where is that information? Though I don't necessarily agree that this will be the case with our officers in the environment, but it does beg the question, what if it does become the habit of our officers in the Environment Department? So let's put measures in place to keep us on track and make sure that we are following the right road. Thank you very much, and I call for the appel.
Very well, the appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. And I'll ask the greffier to open the voting.
Are we voting in parts or
Just voting on part A.
Greffier,
on the part A?
I think we can now.
Sorry, Mum, could you confirm? Yes.
The voting system is working now. I'm sorry.
The question is voting on part A.
For part A of the amendment. Sorry. If all members have had an opportunity to cast their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the amendment has been lost. There were 19 votes in favour and 27 votes contre and no abstentions.
We have the numbers, ma'am.
Gracias.
Those members voting for the Connaught Harbour, St Peter, St Clement, Grouville and St One, Deputy Southern, Luce, Lehegara, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mezek, Coles, Porre, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Kovac, Andrews, Tadier and Feltham, and the members voting contre, the Connaught Harbour, St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity, St John, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Labby, Doublé, Morel, Ayer, Gardner, Gorst, Moore, Balash, War, Miles, Reniff, Rose Binet, Jearn, Miller, Howe, Tom Binet, Ferry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Stevenson.
We now return to the main proposition. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Luce.
Thank you, Ma'am, and I'll just return briefly, members, to my meeting, a panel's meeting with the Assistant Minister on the 30th of November, and just to tell the Assembly that we asked some questions about membership and about funding. We've asked the Assistant Minister if she felt it's sufficient that only one member of the Climate Council needed to be from Jersey, and she explained that the requirement is at least one member, but she hopes they will obtain more. However, it was further explained that they felt it would be hard to find the level of expertise required from Jersey-born individuals without the person being conflicted. The panel raised concerns that it would not want the Climate Council to be flying members continuously backwards and forwards. However, it was explained by the Assistant Minister that there's many vacancies across the island, it can be difficult to find the correct specialisms from people who are here in Jersey. On the issue of funding, the Assistant Minister explained that the Council will be funded from the Climate Emergency Fund, and the funds are already allocated up to 2025. And the cost of Council members, we, as a panel, stated we felt perhaps the amount of money to be paid to members shouldn't be defined in the application, because sometimes when you define what the price is, that's exactly what people want to see and they tender accordingly. Instead, we maybe suggested that we could simply recruit and define the rate offered once we've seen what the job is generally offering at that time. Another issue that we raised on funding is just to see where the allocation for funding will come after 2025, and it was explained that the additional sources of revenue into the Climate Emergency Fund will be required to move this forward and to continue to increase the amount available. I have to say the panel had a good briefing with the Assistant Minister on this issue, sir, and members will remember, of course, that the whole idea of the Climate Council, as the Constable of St Bernard's has already alluded to, came from the previous Environment Scrutiny Panel, and we very much support moving forward as proposed. Thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, sorry, apologies. Ma'am, I mean, I'd support this. It should have been every 2 years, but there we are. We are where we are, to coin the phrase of somebody previously in Assembly. Mum, I think what we need to look at though with this Climate Council is, one, listening to what it actually says is very, very important. And I think the independence away from Jersey is actually a very important thing. Climate isn't just what Jersey does. We are playing a role in a world crisis. It was me who stood here for, I don't know how many years, 5 years ago, and tried to convince the Assembly to commit to a climate emergency, which it did. And I wonder whether the Assembly knew what it was committing to at that time. And I must confess, Ma'am, that I don't think we've gone as far as we should be. And I don't think we're quite in the right direction yet. So if a council with independent members that can look at this, the science behind it, the genuine science behind it, and our role in such a wider world can bring forward ideas, then I think that should be welcomed. I think it's important as well to have a much wider view of what we're doing as Jersey. I have this terrible recurring dream of an oil-producing nation-backed wind turbine in our bay so that they can have the first layer of greenwash using Jersey as the blank wall in which they will wash it on. And we must avoid that, because as we move towards a carbon-neutral future, that phrase itself will become something different to different people, and it cannot do that. And we must avoid those drives to carry on as we are, but make it look better, because this is not something that we can leave for our future generations and ignore. And many, I would suggest, perhaps feel uneasy with this because it might change the way we have to lead our lives, but we have to deal with it. So I welcome Climate Council. Energy economics, that's going to be an interesting one. It'd be interesting to see who we get about the economics of this, seeing as we seem to be happy to do treaties with anyone in the world, regardless of their effect on climate change, and that's something we need to consider. Climate change is a moral issue, Mum, and I think that's what I'd like to add to this debate today. It is a moral issue as much as anything else. Climate change is a human rights issue, and unless we address that effectively and take our role in it, then we cannot be said to be a genuine free-thinking democracy, even though some are accused of being enemies of free thought. Mum, I think that what we need to do is to support this, and particularly the part on income inequality and a just transition. There is nothing in the government plan, is it government plan? Government plan, I don't know what they're called anymore, on income inequality. There is nothing there, there's nothing mentioned. But this council, Mum, will have to talk about income inequality. There is a contradiction in government policy that I think needs to be addressed first. Because if we're not looking at it as a key feature of what government is doing, how can we look at it as a key feature of this climate council and climate change? And the just transition is exactly linked to that. A just transition is not just about not being able to drive your 4x4 down a road because it's unjust, it's against my human rights to not be able to do that anymore. It's about the erosion of poverty that will happen, that will be emphasised, will be amplified is the word, when we come to need to make the changes when it comes to climate change. And we're seeing it already. Those who are reliant upon fossil fuels are very rapidly being thrown into a really difficult situation because of the cost of oil and gas and so on and so forth. But those who have had the finance to move towards electrical heating already, for example, and I know this personally, haven't faced that because at the moment Jersey Electric have got a good deal with France and we haven't seen those price increases. But if those price increases happen, what will happen to those people who will be affected by them? And I say that because if we're going to have these key points in this Climate Council, we need to be addressing them as government and as this Assembly. This cannot be something that's just standalone as another commentary on what's going on. And I've got to say there's an awful lot of commentary going on in our Assembly at the moment, but not a lot of action at times, I believe, in my personal belief. So I would like to see us not only adopt this Climate Council, but listen to it, take the advice it gives and act on that advice. Because if we do not act, we'll not be taking our responsibility seriously. So all power to their own elbow, Mum, and let's get on with it. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? No members wishing to speak. And I close the debate and I call on the Assistant Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mum. The role of the Climate Council is to provide independent review on our progress to delivering the carbon neutral roadmap. And we need to have expertise in a number of fields that we've mentioned before in order to independently assess the direction we've chosen to take on Jersey and pull us in the opportunities that we've missed. The Climate Council will report on progress against all carbon neutral road policies, but will have autonomy to determine for itself where its attention and efforts are best placed. It is intended to be independent from government, and therefore the Secretariat support for it will be provided externally. Officers in SPPP will work with the scrutiny panel and the greffier to agree how best to provide this independent support. And speaking to Deputy Luce's points, we're hoping that a meeting of the Climate Council will be online and we will not have to fly them to Jersey. But the main focus is that each of the independent experts within the council report on our policies and our progress from their own expertise and do their own analysis from their view of their expertise. So they will be providing that reporting rather than potentially meeting up as such, and we will then have the independent secretariat who will help pull this report together. So I believe the council's composition, scope and focus is proportionate to Jersey's size. The range of the expertise offered by the council members will bring us value, and it will be useful for us as an island and as an assembly and as the next government going forward. The council's 4-year reporting cycle is appropriate. It keeps costs low, gives officers capacity to deliver emission reduction policies, and internal carbon neutral roadmap governance is robust. Therefore, ma'am, I would like to call for the appeal. Thank you.
The appeal has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now cast their votes, ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the proposition has been carried. There were 45 votes pour and no votes contre. The next item is the Draft Banking Business Amendment Number 7, Commencement Jersey Act 2000, P2 of 2023, lodged by the Minister for External Relations and Financial Services. And the main respondent for this debate is the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
Draft Banking Business Amendment Number 7, Commencement Jersey Act 2000. The states make this act under Article 4 of the Banking Business Amendment Number 7 Jersey Law 2011.
Deputy Miller, I understand you're acting as rapporteur for this item.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. The Banking Business Amendment Number 7 Jersey Law 2011 was adopted by the states on 16th March 2011 and sanctioned by Order of Her Majesty Council on 16th November 2011. I would just point out there is an error in the report which indicates that royal sanction was given in February 2017. That's a regrettable error in the report. It was sanctioned in November 2011 and registered by the Royal Court in December 2011. This is now the Commencement Act to bring Amendment Number 7 into force. Amendment Number 7 provides enabling powers to create orders under the Banking Business Jersey Law 1991, specifically in relation to the accounting and audit of banks under the law. I should just comment now, I think, on why there's such a long period of time between the law being approved and it now coming into force. Although Amendment 7 was previously approved by the states with the intention of delayed implementation to allow for the development of secondary legislation, to allow it to be enacted, additional changes were required to reflect a change in structure of the majority of banks in Jersey, which now take the form of branches of foreign banks rather than Jersey incorporated companies. That is a shift that has happened over the last few years. The effect of the Appointed Day Act is to bring into force all provisions of Amendment Number 7 on the 1st of August 2023. This date has been determined in consultation with the relevant banks to align with their reporting periods and allow a clean transition to the new updated requirements. Some members may also recall that the Banking Business Amendment Number 9, Jersey Law 2022, was adopted by the states on 30th of March 2022 and has also received royal assent and been registered by the Royal Court in June of 2022. The coming into force of Amendment number 7 will trigger Article 6 of Amendment number 9, bringing the entirety of Amendment number 9 into force on the same date of 1st August 2023. Amendment 9 proposed technical amendments to allow the Jersey Financial Services Commission the same powers and authority in respect of financial reporting and auditors in respect of all banks, regardless whether the bank is incorporated in Jersey or is a branch of an overseas foreign bank. These amendments are part of a broad package of proposed legislative and regulatory changes that the JFSC has been developing, which will ensure that banks have fit-for-purpose requirements regarding their auditors and financial reporting, and provide consistency with requirements imposed on other financial services businesses under the Financial Services Jersey Law 1998. Ma'am, I propose the proposition. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, ma'am.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? In which case, draw the debate to a close, Minister.
Yes, ma'am, may I call for the appel?
You may call for the appel, indeed.
Thank you.
Members wish to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have now had an opportunity to cast their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the proposition has been adopted. There were 41 votes pour and no votes contre. We now move on to the next item, which is trainee minimum wage, P5 of 2023, which was lodged by Deputy Andrews of St Helier North. The main respondent is the Minister for Social Security. There is an amendment lodged by the Minister for Social Security. Deputy Andrews, do you accept the amendment?
Yes, I do, ma'am.
So do you wish for the proposition to be read as amended?
Yes, please, ma'am. Yeah.
Are members content for the proposition to be read as amended? Very well, greffier, if you would read the proposition as amended.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion that the trainee minimum wage rate should be harmonised with the main minimum wage rate by way of ministerial order for all employees of school leaving age and above no later than the 1st of January 2024, pursuant to the Jersey Employment Forum recommendations published on the 8th of September 2022.
Deputy Andrews.
Thank you, ma'am. Just before I begin, I think it's quite important that all members declare if there is a conflict of interest that they have for this debate.
So those who are employers,
yes, if there's a
sorry.
conflict, yeah,
Yeah.
if they employ anybody who's an employee.
Perhaps if we could ask members members are employers who may be conflicted in this debate, if they could indicate an interest in this. I'm not entirely certain that it's...
Ma'am, I'm an employer, but... Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, Ma'am. I don't think it conflicts, really. This is a standard rate across the island, and I'll be voting for the proposition. So I don't feel conflicted at all. We normally stay ahead of the pack in my company, and I don't feel conflicted. But I will take your ruling.
I think generally, in circumstances such as this, when dealing with a proposition where there's an issue that's shared by a large proportion of the population, that it's not deemed necessary for members to declare an interest in this matter. And I'm not entirely certain that it is necessary on this occasion, Deputy.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I am very pleased to be bringing forward this proposition before the Assembly and for this, the executive to actually be bringing forward an amendment that I have accepted as well. I think we all understand that Jersey is a very expensive place to live, and if we're looking at a year one trainee who's on £7.87 per hour, I think that is actually just going to allow them to have a life of poverty, and that is it, nothing more. And even when we're looking at year two trainee rates at £9.19, I think that again is a very poor earnings per hour. And therefore I believe that the baseline wage should be harmonised, as the amendment mentions, into the minimum wage at £10.50 per hour. And the reason for this is to actually allow wage labour to have financial independence. I think there is actually too much financial dependence on the government, and there is also too much government redistribution due to the failings of the market and in terms of how incomes are actually distributed within the marketplace. And again, I think we could be maybe looking at firms, the type of firms that we have in Jersey, and also the level of scarcity and also the level of demand for those firms. And of course, we need to be looking at the demand for goods and essentially the way how distributions are made. That it's not just about payroll expenses, it's also about non-payroll expenses that we have to factor in here for firms. And I think some firms probably have a higher level of non-payroll expenses compared to payroll expenses that we need to also consider in this debate. But when we are looking at the current trainee minimum wage rates, I think there's quite a few people who are on the trainee minimum wage rates who are in a position of negative savings where they are actually expending more than they're able to save. And actually they cannot build up a reserve because their income is so diminutive. And actually this is an opportunity now where we can be increasing the baseline wage to actually allow people to have more disposable income so they can consume more, so they can save more as well. And I think it allows them at least to have a greater purchasing power. And I think that's really important. There's actually going to be more flows generated within our economy as a result of this. And I think that is an actual benefit of bringing forward this proposition. I know behind the scenes there were some members who had reservations about me bringing forward this proposition. They felt there needed to be greater stakeholder engagement. Well, the Jersey Employment Forum, they conducted their research, empirical-based evidence, and the findings are that we should actually be seeing the trainee minimum wage be amalgamated, they said, into the minimum wage from January 2024. And that is essentially what I am doing. Now, if this legislature can agree that actually the minimum wage needs to be increased, as it has been already last year, then surely we can actually increase the trainee minimum wage rates up to the minimum wage rate. And it seems rather peculiar to actually even consider, if any member is considering voting against this proposition, because when we need to look at the size of our labour market, we are in excess of, say, 60,000 people working in our labour market. And as empirical evidence shows, in 2016 there was under 100 trainees on the minimum wage rate. Now that is actually below 1%. So why are trainees having to be paid less compared to everybody else? I think that's a very good argument. And if anybody is willing to counter me, then please feel free to do so. But I don't think that should be the case. I think everybody should be in agreement with me here. I think we need to be more progressive, and I think we need to be taking decisions as a government where we are focusing on decisions where we can actually focus on market pre-distribution instead of government redistribution. Because government redistribution, in my view, is all about public administration being inefficient. We are using taxpayer money to essentially indirectly subsidise households and to indirectly subsidise wage labour, and that cannot continue. Now, I believe we have a lever in place, and that is fiscal policy, and there can actually be changes to actually increase aggregate demand in our economy, to create new jobs, to invest in people, to invest in specialisation, so people can actually have a higher level of earnings. But those who are actually paid the trainee minimum wage rate, you need to wonder, what progression do they have in that current job that they are in? What is the top level of earnings that they could receive? Well, if they start off that low, then it's probably not going to be even in line with, say, the median wage longer term, if the aspiration is that they want to fulfill their career in that market that they work in. So I will leave it there, Ma'am, and I hope that members are willing to offer a good contribution to this debate. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, Ma'am. I would support this. I'm slightly disappointed that the amendment was accepted, if I'm honest, and there is a reason for that. It's because of a particular wording in the amendment, which is the word harmonised. Now, harmonies can be the same as, or harmonies can be lower than, or higher than. The true, you can use I won't even attempt, Ma'am, musical explanation of this because that's way beyond my realms in my simple role musically. I don't know what a harmony is, but there we go. But I think it's a really important point. If we are going, I fully accept that all trainees should receive at least the minimum wage. We are a small island and we need to attract and retain those who are training for roles on this island and then will stay here and use their skills on this island. Unless we address that issue, we are going to have a constant problem with the supply of people to work in our industries and our economy. There is a simple point that I think we would probably all agree on. But if we do not pay beyond a wage that is not livable to do that, then we are going to have an issue. Now, you could say, oh, well, if you're a trainee, you're not fully able to perform a role. I don't see that as the point that's important here. A minimum wage is not that high a wage anyway. And if you have a business that cannot sustain a minimum wage, you have to look at your business model. It's an unpalatable fact, but it's a fact. Now, what's the role of government in this? The role of government is to provide the framework to enable this to happen. And that framework is to say, we will say to you, the trainee wage will be at least the minimum wage, which is what we're saying here today. And now if a business says, but hang on, we've got a problem with that, then you've got two things that government can do. Use other mechanisms to support that business. Now, that can be anything. That can be a reduction in social security contributions, for example, which is going to probably be the percentage difference anyway. So you can support businesses to have that decent wage. And in that way, trainees see themselves as part of the workforce just like everybody else and take on that role. That's an important cultural change in the way that we do things. So unless we're willing to do that, that's a problem. And the problem with the word harmonisation is that this is not, I don't think it gives a permanency that we're looking for. And that would just be my warning shot, that's all. If it comes later on, it's a difficult time, then we'll cut the minimum wage and we'll go back to the trainee wage, and there should always be a trainee wage. Actually, I think that a trainee is different from a trainee wage. A trainee who is perhaps studying at the same time, putting in extra hours in order to do that, that the provision of decent, useful training with a qualification at the end, for example, that can be taken elsewhere. That's the important part about training. And I think there has been in the past a problem with trainees going from trainee job to trainee job to trainee job and staying on that trainee wage for a long, long time. A form of simple exploitation that can be stopped by having a minimum wage. So I think this focuses the way in which we train our individuals going into the workforce by saying there will be a minimum wage when you do it, and you can't just swap people from trainee wage to trainee wage because it's cheap labour. And I think that's a really, really important point to have. And that's why this needs to be agreed. And you see my problem with the word harmonisation. I might just be being paranoid here, Mum, about the word harmonisation, but I want to get this on Hansard so that if it does happen, we can come back to it in a bit of time. So I fully support this, and I urge members to support this as well. And as we look to the future of this island, if we do not provide meaningful training, a meaningful wage, and a sustainable way, and when I say sustainable, I mean for those trainees to actually live here and survive. And let's be honest about it, you can't live on minimum wage. You can't live on minimum wage on this island to any decent standard anyway. Unless you're working 2 or 3 jobs and you're training one and then working another one part-time in the evening. And I'm going to go back to something that was mentioned yesterday. I wonder where the gender inequality in there is. I bet it's enormous. I bet there's an enormous gap in inequality there in that situation on the island. So this is, to be quite frank, a very small step. And if we can't agree this, then I think we've got a real problem with our traineeships into the future. So I urge members to agree this. And so well done to the Deputy for doing it. Just be careful of that word is what I would say to everybody in the Assembly. Thank you, Mum.
Deputy Miller.
Thank you, Ma'am. First of all, I'm grateful to Deputy Andrews for accepting my amendment to his proposition. Our intentions are broadly the same, to ensure that those employed on a trainee rate in future do receive the same hourly rate as those on the main minimum wage. In its recent report on the minimum wage, the Employment Forum did indeed recommend the removal of separate trainee rates, and we had been minded, we were certainly giving that clear consideration in any event, and it's pleasing that their recommendation is reflected in this amendment. Trainee rates have been a feature of the employment law for many years. The law says that trainee rates may be set at different levels from the main minimum wage, but it's not compulsory that there are. The intention here is to maintain the flexibility provided for in the employment law so that in future, ministers could, as Deputy Ward suggests, could decide to restore a differential rate if circumstances require. And that's why my amendment says harmonise rather than integrate. As my report points out, integrating the rates would require legislative changes and remove that element of flexibility, which in my view should be maintained, because while the economy is in a very, well, the economy would appear to be in a healthy state, and we have the lowest number of people actively seeking work that we ever have. We only have less than 700 people seeking work at the moment, and in fact we are virtually in full employment. That may change, and we do need to recognise economic circumstances from time to time, and retaining the current framework allows us that flexibility. My intention, however, and there is a caveat which I will come on to, is to move to that single rate from 1st of January 2024. I will not need to make any amendments to the way that the law currently operates in order to move to a single rate for trainees and others employed on the minimum wage. I can do that simply by making ministerial order, setting out a single minimum wage rate that will apply to all employees, including trainees. My amendment leaves in place a legal structure which underpins the training regime in Jersey. Employers will be free to continue to offer structured training contracts as set out in the law. They will simply be required to pay trainees the main minimum wage. Under our current economic conditions, a single rate may help with the recruitment and retention of employees in Jersey, particularly those just starting out in the world of work, but also those who are having a career change in their older years. It's important to point out, as Deputy Andrews does in his original proposition, that those on trainee rates are currently likely to be very few in number, and I think the estimate is possibly under 100. But flexibility in the labour market is key, and I commend the proposition as amended to the Assembly. However, I must make one very important caveat. Since filing the amendment, I have heard representations from those who are employing trainees to say that this could have a quite devastating effect on them. It's not all big business and unscrupulous employers that employ trainees. There are businesses, including charities and some very small artisanal employers who currently employ trainees on a trainee wage. However, on the other hand, as well as paying the trainee wage, they are paying for those people to have qualifications, whether that's through Highlands or through other training providers, and obtain qualifications. Some of those charities may find it very difficult to afford the minimum wage and to pay for those qualifications. And I personally would be very, very disappointed if what ended up in January is that people who are already on halfway through a trainee programme lose that job because of this proposition. We must be aware of that. And while while I support the proposition, what I would like to do in the next few months is really to reach out to those employers and just see what their terms of their trainee rates are, because the last thing anybody wants is someone to be left high and dry halfway through a training contract and not be able to pay. They may get the minimum wage, but the minimum wage may not give them the money to pay for the remainder of the training course that they're on. Now, if that training course costs several £1,000s, as they may do, we may have young people and people halfway through retraining who are basically left high and dry, and that is a very real unintended consequence of this proposition. So my caveat to this is that we do need to understand more. The Employment Forum have consulted, but I think the Employment Forum consult generally with associations and larger employees. I don't know how far and into what depth they will have gone. Will they have captured the employees who are teaching someone jewellery making or some other artisanal skill, and which can literally only pay the minimum wage? So we do have to do some homework between now and October, when the minimum wage is next set, to make sure that we are not actually seriously disadvantaging people who are currently on training contracts by doing this. But I agree, in all the principles, I agree that trainees should be paid appropriate wages. It is not unusual in any industry for trainees to be paid less. Trainee lawyers, I can tell you from experience, are paid less than qualified lawyers, as are trainee accountants, as I'm sure are trainee doctors and trainee everything else. So the concept of trainees being paid less is not in itself offensive. I agree we must avoid exploitation of the trainee rate, but there is a scope for it, and we may have to find other ways of addressing the risk of people losing qualifications because their employer can no longer afford to pay for them because of the minimum rate. I'm not doing that to persuade anybody not to support the proposition. I'm simply raising a very, very real concern that has been made to members of government since this amendment was filed. So, thank you, Madam.
Deputy Morale.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank Deputy Miller for her speech there, because it is the case that the road to a very bad place may be paved with good intentions, and again, without asking anyone to not support this, I'm not doing that. What I am saying is that we may find that by removing the trainee rate, we may find that a really important part of Deputy Andrews' speech is actually becomes redundant or becomes overturned, I guess is another way. And that is, Deputy Andrews in his speech talked a lot about government shouldn't be shouldering the bill. And so he was thinking that because it is a lower trainee rate, therefore government is effectively subsidising wages, I assume. He means through the income support scheme. But that would be a case where the trainee rate is not being used properly. When a trainee rate is used properly, the employer will be spending thousands of pounds on training courses for that employee, therefore saving the government and the employee the thousands of pounds cost of that training. And so there is, unfortunately, a paradox and a problem in Deputy Andrews' speech and his assertion. It seems that Deputy Andrews thinks that employers only abuse the system, and that, I'm sure, is not the case. We therefore have a situation where government, as a result of this, which is fine as long as you do it, government may end up footing the bill for more training, because you may find that people decide, or employers, particularly, as Deputy Miller said, artisans or small organisations, including third sector organisations, may choose to withdraw apprenticeships because they're paying the full rate. Why would they then necessarily want to pay for an apprentice to be trained on top of that? May as well go to the market and find someone who's already trained. And so there is a potential pitfall in all this, and I just think it's really important that we understand that we need to go into this with our eyes open. And so I fully support Deputy Miller in saying that we do need to find out how those 100 or so people who are on this rate at the moment, how that rate is being used to support their training. If in cases where it's not actually being used to support training, well, to me, that's an abuse of the system. But in a situation where an employer is also paying thousands of pounds for training, whether it's a vocational training or degree training, whatever it may be, then we need to be aware that that may dry up and the government may end up footing a larger bill as a result of this. So I think there is a fallacy in Deputy Andrews' argument. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try this, but in doing so, we need to make sure, as Deputy Miller said, that we really need to make sure that people aren't made redundant as a result of this. And so it does need to be done with care, and it needs to be done with our eyes open. That has been my fear, is that we all go charging forward saying, yes, this is the right principle, this is the right ideal, but don't actually appreciate what the reality is. As is unfortunately often the case in this assembly, we run to our ideals whilst ignoring the realities. So I just ask, and it's really just a caveat to the accepting this and supporting this, is that we do need to know what we're doing. We do need to have our eyes open. We do need to make sure that people aren't made redundant as a result. And we do need to make sure, in my view, because I want employers to continue paying for training, we need to make sure that this doesn't stop employers paying for training, which it may well do. And in that case, government will end up with a much bigger bill, and Deputy Andrews will have got it wrong, quite simply. And his ideals will have ended up with the government having a much bigger bill for training. So we do need to be aware. And so I'm just advising the Assembly that that is a possible consequence of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Southern.
Thank you, Mel. And I'll go further than the previous 2-3 speakers and focus on this word harmonisation. And whether you like it or not, harmonisation could take place in one of two ways. You reduce the wage and harmonise, or you increase the wage and harmonise. Harmonise doesn't work in that sense. And we've almost had the picture, but in 3-6 months' time, the Minister will be looking at what the effect and the impact of this harmonisation was, and may well decide, that's affecting training, they're reducing the number of trainees, we'll have to change it. And this doesn't alter that in one job. So I'm going to be ultimately careful, because I think we shouldn't be voting for it, but it's actually imperfect. That's not right. So I would be saying, don't vote for this. Harmonisation means what you want it to mean, what the Minister wants it to mean, and could be up and could be down. Doesn't actually do what it says on the can. And I'm aware that the wording you use is absolutely vital. That's what, on your proposition, and harmonisation doesn't work for me. So I personally am tempted to vote against this and say, go away, get a new word and get it right.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, actually, when I read the amendment, I've had a similar kind of response to the word harmonisation. I play the piano very badly, and I understand chord structure, and that notes don't have to be the same if you're playing chords. But I do commend Deputy Andrews for having had to look at the Employment Forum work, because one thing that, and I very much thank the Minister for Economic Development for perhaps articulating a certain element of discomfort I had when I saw the proposition, because in the role that certainly I have as a scrutineer for the Economics and International Affairs panel, there is this obligation to consult with industry and to get views of industry. And that I know we as a panel haven't done in the case of this particular proposition. But the Employment Forum is one kind of source of having done that, albeit a few years ago. I did do some of my own kind of personal exchanges of views with sort of people in the industry and, well, one was in pest control actually, about the implications of this, and it was pointed out to me that usually these things can have an impact on costs of the provision of certain business services. And also, and this is something that's curious because I know that I've had this conversation with the Minister for Social Security, that it was mentioned, and this has come again, about certain employees asking for rates, salaries not to be increased because it would have an impact on their income support. Now, it makes me wonder whether there's something kind of going wrong here in terms of income support, or something going wrong in terms of the understanding of income support. So, in fact, I thank Deputy Andrews for even setting me along that path, because it's an interesting area I'd like to examine more. And I'm also quite conscious of the fact that the minimum wage, which I did support the increase, but again, the opportunity to explore things further with the Employment Forum wasn't actually pursued at that time. So I will be supporting this amendment, but generally I would prefer a bit more in the way of evidence of consultation with industry for the reasons I've said.
Thank you, Deputy. The Constable of St Clement.
Thank you, Mum. I'm struggling with this a little bit, but I have to say that rather than feeling the wrath of the greffiers, I don't feel too sorry for lawyers.
It's very lucky that none of us are lawyers, actually, Constable.
Yeah, I do know a young hotelier from years ago, in the 70s, that was paid £15 a week for 70 hours whilst attending Highlands College. He went on to have a fairly successful career. But I think this is a piece of social justice. It's nothing more than that, and we can sort the slight differences out sometime later. Let's not kid ourselves that trainees are productive. They're a productive part of the company that they work for. Years back, I remember a very successful accounting firm that used to come in and do the company I used to represent's books, the hotel group. And they used to come in, charge us a fortune, of course, as accountants do. But the work was done by the trainees. It was a 4-day event every month, and a trainee came in, sometimes 2, and the main accountant would go backwards and forwards to the office in town, and the trainee did all the work. 8 hours a day, thumping away at the calculator, reams of stuff coming out. They did the work. They're very productive. The other thing I have to point out is the investment in the trainees is an investment. These companies employed trainees to train them with the theory that they will work for them later on for a number of years. That's accountants, carpenters, lawyers, etc., etc. So I think this is a piece of social justice that needs amending. And if we need to amend the amendment later on, I do take on board what the Minister says, that could be done at a later stage. But I think Jersey is a very expensive place to live. Teenagers and young people need training. They want to be professional. They want to progress. And I think the wage that they're being paid at the moment is insufficient to keep up with their cohort. And so therefore I will be voting for the proposition. Thank you.
Constable of St Brelard.
Thank you, Mum. And I'm going to speak to Council Care, I think, today. I would say, firstly, that anyone who pays a minimum wage is unlikely to have any staff in this day and age, because you just won't have any if you pay that sort of money. That's the truth of it. I'm concerned of the consequences, as the Social Security Minister mentioned, of government interfering in what is in fact commercial activity. I'm not oblivious to the effects of paying too low wage having on the need for government to support people, and that's obviously quite wrong. But recent events in the past few days dictate that commerce can be quite fragile. Now, recent events have been, we don't know what have dictated that. Salaries will have had a part to play. Labour cost is an enormous part of the cost of any business. And what I'm keener to encourage is that jobs are offered. Jobs that are sustainable are offered. Now, I say sustainable not only for the employee, but also for the employer. And if an employer isn't in a position to offer a sustainable job, well, there won't be a job. So that's fewer jobs available to those who are on the marketplace for one. I think it was alluded in a previous speech, training costs are not insignificant, and it can cost thousands. It really can cost thousands, and in small businesses, this is an enormous amount on their overhead, and that overhead cost has to be translated into their sales figures, which is not always easy to achieve. The Employment Forum has been mentioned several times. Ma'am, I don't feel personally the Employment Forum has been at all effective, and I say that with personal experience. I've never seen them. I've been employing people for 50 years. I'm conflicted, you might say, and people, should we say, apprentices upwards, never seen hide nor hair of the Employment Forum. So I think maybe they need to reach out a bit further if they're to get realistic information which can feed members of the chamber. I think further education, the further education system with regard to vocational education, vocational courses, may need further consideration. And I would refer back several years ago, because I've been in a long time, the arrangement was that if you had an apprentice, you'd send them to Highlands, they'd have a day's training, and you would pay for that day's training. So you would pay them for that day's training. So effectively, the apprentice had a full week's wage, and government contributed a day's training. And actually it worked. But then it got fouled up with complication, which made it actually quite difficult for employers to engage in such a way. So I think that I would just refer, I made a note that the responsibility of employers to shoulder the burden on this is, I feel, a degree unfair. And I refer to the building trade, which has changed enormously in the past few years. And we heard that, well, with the calamity of yesterday, that firm mentioned was employing some 50 people, which was unusually high. Most firms, ma'am, won't be employing anything like that in terms of core staff. Most of their workers will be subcontractors, and those subcontractors will be 2, 3, 4, 5-man bands. And truthfully, they won't be able to afford to pay trainees at all. And that's something we need to encourage back in, because otherwise we aren't going to get good skilled training for the youngsters in the island. So I just conclude by counselling care over the consequences of government interference. The less, the better, as far as I'm concerned. So on that basis, I don't feel I can support the proposition. Thank you, ma'am.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, ma'am. Just to follow the Conotab of St Villard's speech, both Deputy Barbara Ward and I spent 9 years on the Employment Forum, and I can assure the Conotab that the research and the consultation that we undertook was extensive, even going to the point of getting compliance inspectors from Social Security who were conducting business surveys to speak personally to staff to get their opinion on the level of the minimum wage. Because it's relatively easy to get strong opinions on the level of minimum wage from employers, far more difficult to get the opinions of individuals who are actually working in those industries that pay minimum wage to have their say. And we reached out extensively to those groups of people, even conducting farm visits and other visits where we knew that minimum wage was paid. So I'm afraid I do refute that allegation that the research was not conclusive or deep enough. Just also to point out that the trainee rate was brought in at a different time in the economic cycle. It was brought in to give younger people the opportunities that they weren't getting to get into the employment situation, to be properly trained, and then become increasingly useful to that business. I do think we tinker with that mechanism at our risk a little bit. I think we've got a good solution in the short term. I prefer to use the word align minimum wage with the trainee rate with the minimum wage rate. But the reality is, I think we've got a good way forward to scope out exactly what is the impact of this, to get possibly the Employment Forum to undertake further consultation and research, and to see if it's going to have an impact, and if it has going to have an impact, what mitigation can realistically be put in place to stop that happening. So I will be supporting this proposition as amended. Thank you, Ma'am.
Deputy Miles.
Thank you, Ma'am. I'd like the Deputy in his summing up to address a particular area, and that is about people with learning disabilities and autism. We have some organisations in Jersey that take people who are trainees, and I would be very concerned that his proposition might interfere with the modelling of the current setup and also future setups. One of the aims that we have here is for people with learning disabilities and autism to undertake purposeful activity in businesses that are productive. And we have one particular business on this island that is extremely productive, that employs predominantly people with learning disabilities and autism. I am not sure how the wage framework for those people is sorted out, but I know that many of them will be in receipt of either long-term incapacity or income support payment. So I think I'm worried about unintended consequences. I wouldn't want to put off employers taking on people with learning disabilities and autism who can provide an excellent and exemplary service, not just in their youth, but also going into early adulthood, mid-adulthood, and certainly older adulthood. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, ma'am. And just to cover some of the comments that have been made about the use of the word harmonisation in this, certainly from my perspective, it would be preferable for the law to be amended to be as clear as possible that the training minimum wage is no longer a thing, certainly in its current format, and that that wage is lifted to the basic minimum wage, and that basic minimum wage is lifted to a proper living wage that's enough for people to sustain their living on it. The wording of the proposition as amended before us will lead to the Minister using her powers to harmonise those two wages, which means raising wages for some people who are currently low paid. That's a good thing, completely support that. Though it's not as strong as perhaps I would like it to be, in being clear that it's not that it shouldn't be a matter of discretion for the Minister and her powers and should be set out clearly in law. That's not actually any different to the situation that there already is, and so accepting this proposition as amended doesn't make that worse. It keeps it as it is, in that the Minister has power for those rates to be not harmonised, but will be choosing to harmonise them in the meantime. That is a situation that is better than what we've currently got. So I think the proposition is worth supporting on that basis. OK, doesn't go as far and create a perfect solution, but it certainly doesn't make anything worse. It doesn't require laws to be changed to provide less security in future for that section of people in our community who are low paid. So on that basis, it's certainly worth supporting. It will see a pay increase for people who deserve a pay increase. I'm up for that, so I'll vote for it.
Does any other member wish to speak? If no other members wish to speak, then I close the debate and I call upon Deputy Andrews to reply.
Thank you, Ma'am. Thank you for everybody who has contributed to this debate. I think it's also quite important to mention when we are looking at those who are on the training minimum wage, we have a low level of input costs. So actually the income that the business is actually generating from the output of that worker is actually going to allow them to have a higher markup. Now, if we're going to be looking at, say, an individual who has a more costly input, where, for instance, we're looking at a higher level of wage that needs to be considered, then potentially we could be looking at less income being generated for the business in terms of the business owners. And also, when we're looking at lower input costs, there's also going to be the opportunity to have more reinvested capital to reinvest back into the business. So that's why we can actually see there is always going to be a need, when we speak of the word trainee, that there is an investment in specialisation in the person's skills development. Now, I think the Minister outlined, and also Deputy Councillor Morell, about the importance of engaging with different sectors and also the stakeholders that potentially will be employing those who are trainees at the moment, who have a trainee minimum wage rate. I think that is quite important. However, I think we have also seen that the States Employment Board have actually done research, and that research has been extensive, and also you need to be looking at the empirical evidence that was in the report itself, and I was quite fortunate enough to read the report on a couple of occasions, once several months ago and also recently as well. I also need to just mention, I know Deputy Scott mentioned about the Economic and International Affairs panel could have conducted research into this. However, that is not the purpose of scrutiny. That's why we have the States Employment Board, who essentially seek stakeholders' engagement to then procure results, but scrutiny is not constructed for that purpose alone. Moving on to age as well, because I think this is also factored in the report. We sometimes can have trainees who could be, for instance, 26 or 27, and they might want to undertake a new career. However, they might be having to start off on the trainee minimum wage rate. They might have a partner, they might have children. So again, there is a potential consequence with them having to actually move careers and end up in that position. And they're most likely actually going to end up having government support them as well. And that was one of the key findings for the States Employment Board, and one of the reasons why they actually decided that we need to increase the baseline rate. That was a recommendation. I think Deputy Helen Miles mentioned something that is also quite important, and probably something that many members didn't even consider. And I think when we look at all types of workers, we have to actually acknowledge that everybody has different needs, but also we have to appreciate that everybody should have the opportunity, okay, to achieve a higher level of earnings, especially in this current climate that we are living in, because Jersey is a very expensive place to live. And I say with the Social Security Minister, this actually might be an opportunity for her to potentially even look at aspects of social policy during this period before 2024, in terms of looking at how we can maybe potentially support those who are low-wage earners. Because I think we have that opportunity to always come up with new ideas and to have mechanisms in place where we can actually improve public administration, to reduce the reliance on government redistribution, and I think that has been quite extensive and has continued to be the case. And for me, I'm definitely an advocate of market redistribution, and that is how incomes are distributed within the market without government intervention. It's to allow workers to have a sufficient level of income so they can actually live, they can afford their bills, and also they can have some level of dignity. And I think that at this moment in time is a problem where many workers are not living a dignified life. And I find that quite distressing myself, because I've come from a lower class background, and I think it's very important that we take decisions to alleviate poverty in this island. And I feel that by doing this, this is a progressive measure. This is allowing wage labour to have a pay rise, and also to allow them to see an increase in earnings every single week above £100 in addition. And you just need to be looking at cost-push inflation in the economy at the moment. We just need to look at the price of food. It's very costly. And actually, trainee minimum wage earners' purchasing power is actually being eroded due to inflation. And this is actually going to allow for that jump happen. But as the Minister said, it's important when we mention harmonisation, there is a need to consult with different sectors and also different employers to actually then come up with a conclusion as to how this will be finally implemented. And potentially, yes, there could be some issues that will be raised from that process. But it also has to be said, from the moment I engaged with the Minister, I think they were quite happy with my proposition, and also I was quite content with the amendment. But it just seems as though ever since Sunday, when I was lobbied by the wife of the Minister, that there have been several conversations with me directly about withdrawing this proposition. And I'm sorry, that's not the case. I'm not going to be listening to somebody who is the partner of a minister who's going to try and lobby me as a backbencher, because that is not the case. That is not going to happen. Let me tell you now. And I think it's really important that, as a backbencher, I should have the respect of being able to bring forward my own proposition without being lobbied privately. I think that's really important that I say that, because there's a couple of messages that, again, were quite abrasive, in fairness. And again, I'm not going to go into details on naming the individual, but, I think it's really important that, people are aware of the goings-on behind the scenes, because this should have been a done deal. And unfortunately, we've kind of come into this debate, and there has been a slight change in angle. There's been a couple of ministers who've come up to me and said, well, we will accept it, but, we do have reservations. Well, it seems to me there's only been one member who's actually been lobbying within the Council of Ministers recently, because last week it was fine, and this week there's a different circumstance altogether. So I think that is quite disappointing, in all fairness, if I'm being honest. So I think it's just important now we get to the vote and we just increase the wage. It's quite simple. Thank you, Ma'am.
Deputy, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, but I think yesterday the bailiff drew attention to members that there's no necessity to use a member's first name unless it is in relation to the two members where we have the same surname. So just to watch out in future that it should be Deputy Miles and Deputy Morrell when you're referring to those members. Deputy Morrell, your light's on.
Yes, it was just to ask for a point of clarification about the States Employment Board that I believe Deputy Andrews meant the Jersey Employment Forum. And so in order to have Hansard reflect what I believe he meant, I just thought he might want to give way. Did he mean the Jersey Employment Forum?
Jersey Employment Forum, yes. Sorry.
Thank you, Deputy. And Deputy Scott?
And mine's a point of clarification.
Sorry, could you stand, Deputy?
Sorry, another point of clarification, because I just wondered if Deputy Andrews is aware that in the Code of Practice for Scrutiny, it says that the Chair has to ensure prominence is given to effective public engagement appropriate to the context and stakeholder groups for each piece of work.
It's not really a point of clarification, Deputy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Andrews, you come to the end of your speech.
Please.
Yeah. The appel has been called for. Members are asked to return to the chamber. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had an opportunity to cast their vote. I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the proposition has been adopted. There were 41 votes for and 7 votes contre and no abstentions.
Could I have the contre, please?
Yeah,
those members voting contre, the Connétable, St Bernard and Grouville, and Deputies Morrell, Miles, Scott, Howell and Tom Binney.
Very well. The final item is entitled Assembly Consideration of the Bilateral Treaty with the UAE, P6 of 2023, lodged by Deputy Mezek of St Heliers South, and the main respondent is the Minister for External Relations and Financial Services. There are 2 amendments, one lodged by Deputy Balash of St Clement and one lodged by the Minister for External Relations and Financial Services. Do you accept either of those amendments, Deputy?
Ma'am, I'm happy for my proposition to be proposed as read by both of those amendments, and if I can then use my speech to then explain what my position on both parts will become as amended. But I'm happy for the states to debate them as amended.
So is the Assembly content to take the propositions as amended? Yes. Yeah. Grafia, if you're able, on the hoof, to read the proposition as amended by both those amendments.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion. A, to request the Minister for External Relations and Financial Services to take the necessary final steps to bring the bilateral investment treaty with the United Arab Emirates into force as soon as possible. And B, to request the Legislation Advisory Panel, in consultation with the Privileges and Procedures Committee, to bring forward legislation by which all treaties and international agreements signed by a minister under entrustment from the United Kingdom Government or to be extended to Jersey under the United Kingdom Government's ratification process are subject to ratification by the States Assembly before they come into force.
Deputy Mayor Sek.
Thank you, ma'am. Can I start by thanking the Treasury Minister and officers from the External Relations Department for a very helpful conversation in the run-up to them proposing their amendment. There are some tricky legal issues when it comes to this sort of thing, but I found that dialogue very helpful. Ma'am, this proposition was first conceived when various bodies in the States Assembly received briefings on the bilateral investment treaty with the UAE that was being proposed, and it occurred to us that the process by which these treaties are adopted and come into force are very unclear, and if I could say perhaps a bit flippantly, appear to kind of just be conjured for this treaty without very clear guidelines about what the role of our elected parliament is in treaties like this being signed up to in our island's name. And given that we were told that we had a 14-day period to make comments on that, we chose to use it as an opportunity to lodge a proposition to give the Assembly an opportunity to discuss how we might want to proceed in future with these treaties. Having spoken to the Treasury Minister and his officers, who seemed to indicate to me that they would find it helpful for there to be a clear process for these things in the future, I was happy to agree with them on that. The amendment which comes from Deputy Balash, who going to make this point, has not exchanged a single word with me about his amendment either before or after it was lodged, but which I will accept, having spoken to the Treasury Minister, widens its scope and clearly says in it that it will be the States Assembly that is the body that would ratify those treaties. I originally wasn't sure whether ratify would be the right word to use, and whether perhaps approve would be, and it legally be another body that would formally ratify a treaty. But I'm assured that that's not problematic, and the government have said in their reports to their amendment that they're happy to accept that. And so since that widens the scopes and strengthens the role of this Assembly in that process, I'm happy to accept that, and I would urge members to support Part B of this amended proposition, which would see the Legislation Advisory Panel and if I can remind myself what it's amended the second part to, in consultation with the Privileges and Procedures Committee, to go away and come up with those processes. I would argue that that would be a much more satisfactory way of going about adopting these treaties in future, and we will have clear rules on that. We'll know where it stands, and we won't be in the situation we have been with the UAE treaty of it kind of being a process that was conjured for that particular treaty. So this will provide clarity one way or the other in future. So I urge members to support that and hope that that is not controversial. But it was the treaty with the UAE that provoked this to be considered now. We've known for quite some time that a bilateral investment treaty with the UAE has been on the cards. There were press notices and coverage way back in 2021 about a treaty being written and signed up to. And I remember an interested constituent getting in touch with me at the time saying, oh, I've seen the media report on this, that's quite interesting, where can I read this treaty? And I was unable to help her find that treaty. Me as an elected member of Jersey's Parliament, being told that we're signing up to a treaty without reference to this Parliament and without our opinions being asked, didn't appear to have access to that treaty until only just a few short weeks ago. There, I think, can be very legitimate questions raised about whether the presentation of that treaty to us is a fait accompli. It surely must be, given the lack of inclusion of us as a parliament in that process. Our opinion being asked if we considered this a priority and if we thought it was in the best interests of Jersey's reputation and our economy. And I have to say that I am uncomfortable with what appears to be a growing association of this island with countries in other parts of the world with extremely, who are, in my view, extremely disreputable. And the UAE is most certainly on that list. It has an appalling human rights record. And in this age today, where we are rightly very concerned with investments going through multiple jurisdictions that have sources where we are very uncomfortable with them. Great example right now, of course, is Russia, because of their illegal invasion and war in Ukraine. We've rightly frozen all sorts of assets in Jersey connected to that. Other countries do not have quite as good an approach to that as we do, and are involved in all sorts of unpleasant things. We've seen in recent years a desire from some in government for Jersey to have closer relationships with some of the dictatorships in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia inexplicably being one of those, given the role that they play in financing some of the worst crimes being committed on the planet right now. And the UAE does not cover itself in glory as well in many of those things that it takes part in, and some of us are concerned about them not having as stringent processes and concerns when it comes to Russian money as Jersey has had with that. So even though I've accepted the amendment to Part A to change its wording, I've done so to make this a cleaner debate, but I will actually ask members to vote against Part A, it having been adopted, to say, no thank you. That treaty will not have been through the process that we will be expecting future treaties to go through if we adopt Part B. So we'll be giving a free pass to that treaty if we accept Part A. And I would like to say to members to vote against Part A and say to the government, no thank you, back to the drawing board on that one, please. And if you want to bring it back in future, it will be through the process that we'll be setting up with Part B that gives this Assembly a greater say in the matter and a greater opportunity to provide our view about whether we are comfortable with closer economic relations being pursued with countries that are disreputable and which are involved in things that, frankly, if we thought a little bit more about, would give us nightmares, some of what these countries are involved in. So, ma'am, I propose the proposition, but make clear in that I oppose my own amended Part A now. I've allowed the amendment to be read that way because it provides for a cleaner debate in this Assembly, and I make the proposition, ma'am.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, ma'am.
Does any other member wish to speak on Deputy Balash?
Ma'am, these moments don't come very often, so I hope that Deputy Mezek will savour it. But I think he has performed a really important public service in drawing this constitutional issue to the attention of the Assembly. And I'm very grateful to him. I had, in fact, missed the report of the Minister of External Relations, which set up a new system for ratifying international agreements and treaties, or these particular treaties. It was only when I read Deputy Mezek's proposition that it occurred to me that something very important was at stake. The Privileges and Procedures Committee has provided, I think, a very useful report in setting out the practice on ratification of treaties in relation to a number of different countries. It's true that in many countries, ratification is left to the executive, not only to negotiate and sign a treaty, but also to ratify it and bring it into force. In many countries, the United Kingdom, for example, is the most important exemplar. Parliament does have a really important role, and for practical purposes, it is not possible for the government to bring an international agreement into force until Parliament has had the opportunity to scrutinise it, and if Parliament were to express disagreement with it, I'm quite sure that the international agreement would not ultimately be ratified and come into force. There's a long tradition to this. Some members with an interest in history will remember that treaties were sometimes secret, and that Mr. Ribbentrop, then the German foreign minister, and his Soviet counterpart entered a secret and thoroughly disreputable agreement in, I think, 1940 or thereabouts. But nobody knew about it because it had not been ratified by any parliament or in any public sphere. That kind of dramatic event is unlikely to be relevant to our legislature here. But it does underline the fact that knowing what is going on, knowing what the executive is planning or has done in the context of international relations is a very important matter. In Jersey, so I think we can say that we have developed a practice that treaties and international agreements are, in fact, ratified by the Assembly. For the last 10 years or more, Deputy Gorst, and before that, I was responsible for bringing dozens of propositions to this Assembly, seeking the Assembly's approval for different double taxation agreements and tax information exchange agreements. I must say, I think it is arguable that a constitutional rule has evolved. But even if that is not so, it is open nonetheless to the Assembly to decide what it wishes to, that it wishes to assume responsibility as a matter of law for the ratification of treaties and international agreements. It is done that way in the United States, but I don't think that that is relevant because it is what is right for Jersey that counts here. I'm quite sure that we should protect the island's reputation from the possibility, remote as it may be, that a Minister for External Relations in the future might do something silly and seek to enter an international agreement which would be embarrassing for the island. So I thank Deputy Mezek for accepting my amendment, and I shall, in fact, notwithstanding his reservations about paragraph A, vote for both parts of the proposition.
Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I take Deputy Balash's comments, I think, in the spirit that they were meant, but it did seem that his comment that he hopes that members will listen because this is a rare occasion, and then said Deputy Mezek raising and highlighting a serious issue to the Assembly. I don't think the rare occasion is that Deputy Mezek is highlighting serious issues to the Assembly, because he does that all the time and he does a great deal of work, but it's simply that I think he's talking about the fact that they both agree on this. I'm presuming that's what Deputy Balash meant. I'm absolutely of the opinion that these kind of decisions, any agreements that we enter into, be they trade or whatever else with other countries, should ultimately come back to the Assembly for ratification. And indeed, in an ideal world, and before we had ministerial government, I think the expectation is that the Assembly would have much more power, and that is the Assembly, which was the sole decision-making body, not the ministers. And we've seen a slide in that. And I'm grateful that this proposition seeks to redress that. I don't think we can avoid, or that we should necessarily try and avoid, the actual substantive issues here. So this isn't simply about the autonomy of the Assembly making decisions, or at least giving directions, a veto, if you like, to government. I think we also need to consider what kind of countries we are doing business with. There were voices in the last decade who, publicly, and I think some internally, who voiced concern about doing business with Russia. They could see that Russia was not a democracy. It didn't share the same values of the West. And I'm not saying the West always gets it right, but they could quite easily see how Russia was going. And we get into the situation where I think we've rolled out the red carpet for Russian oligarchs to invest in Jersey. And now we're dealing with the consequences of that, where Russia is one of the biggest threats. Putin's one of the biggest threats to stability in the modern world. Yet only a few years ago, we were quite happy to take their money. So, and I'm reminded of the words of Deputy Trevor Pittman in the past, I think, who said, money has no smell. So I'd hope we've learned a lesson from our dealings with Russia. But who are the next potential pariahs on the world stage? We only need to look at their internal policies to make these kind of decisions. You know, I wonder whether the business people in this Assembly would enter into business transactions in their own personal dealings with people who show the warning signs of some of these other questionable regimes around the world. So, whilst the Chief Minister in Question Time yesterday was effectively, as I see it, following a policy of appeasement and saying, oh, you know, well, we do try and raise these issues when we're dealing with foreign dictatorships, as I might call them. And, you know, they're interested in the fact that we have women in leadership. Well, is it the women leaders who are going over to the Middle East to negotiate those contracts? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be sensitive to cultural norms and differences, but I do question where we draw the line on that. So if we, if we in Jersey are espousing local policies and local drives which are in harmony with most other countries to do with closing the income gap between men and women, promoting equality in all its forms, we have other countries which are clamping down on basic human rights, to do with women, to do with homosexuals, and to do with law and order, and implementing death penalties for what we might consider simple, basic human rights, because they're not truly free societies. Why do we want their money? Why do we want to do dealings with them? Are we so desperate for the money that our reputation is a secondary consideration? And I do also question what kind of message it sends to the gay members of our assembly and the wider civil society when we are interacting with countries that aren't simply not up to speed yet on the zeitgeist of the rest of the world, but are actively hostile to gay rights. And that isn't simply something in the Middle East, it's something which is a problem in other countries as well. And if we don't have, as an assembly or individual representatives, the right to raise these concerns when the treaties are being ratified because we don't get a decision, then we're effectively disenfranchising our members and taking the voice away from our constituents who we would seek to represent. Now, I know that there are those who would say, well, the way we do it is through engagement, and we can have those conversations about human rights subtly. First of all, I don't believe that. I don't believe in reality those conversations happen at all to the degree which one would represent that they do happen. There may be the occasional conversation with ambassadors, but probably not, because it's not very politique, and that's not the point of the business dealings we have with them. And quite interestingly, I don't watch a lot of television, but Stephen Fry was on Channel 4 News last night, and he was talking as somebody who's a Jewish gay man. And he said, I used to think that the right way to engage and to affect change was to do it softly. And when I watched people like Peter Tatchell, the famous gay rights campaigner, interrupting church services to try and get his point across, I thought that was the wrong thing to do, because he's just going to alienate people. I'm paraphrasing here. And he said, but I realized that I was wrong and that he was right, and that we do need to take strong action sometimes and to stand up for what is right and for what we believe in. So I'll leave those thoughts with members. And I would say that it's been useful. So the PPC comments were very useful, in fact. And whether we're comparing practice in the UK or in other maybe European parliaments as to how they ratify, and the argument will come back that it's not usual for parliaments to get the final say. They may get a debate, as they can in the UK, but ultimately it's government that decides. They can consider and take into account the feedback. We have to remember that there's a party political context. So in the UK, there's usually a party with a majority, and therefore that they only need to rely on the majority of their party to rule, to govern. So it's up to that party and their government to make the decisions that they see fit. Of course, in other countries, it may well be that they have coalitions of 2 or 3 parties. And so actually the feedback is given at party level, and they come to agreements internally by talking to all of the parties that are represented, so that there is a way of feeding back through that system. We don't really have that in the Jersey context, and I think that's why the ability for the Assembly to have direct input into whatever these treaties or agreements are that are being signed is even more vital. So, Ma'am, are we still Ma'am today? I can't see who's in the chair, I'm sorry. And thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, Ma'am. I will try and be brief. I also have some reservations about the amended Part A of this proposition. I find it very hard to have confidence that this treaty is in the island's best interests. Very few members were actually present at the online briefing that we had about this treaty ahead of this proposition being brought forward. And also a few of us within PPC also had a briefing on the process itself. During that briefing on the process itself, I did ask officers what process they went through and how they decided what countries to prioritise when they were deciding who to negotiate treaties with. And I was rather surprised by the answer, because the answer was more or less, well, whoever is willing to sign a treaty with us, we will broker that. And I did find that, to be honest, a cause for concern and alarm, particularly when dealing with some countries. And as Deputy Tadier just pointed out before me, it's actually not that long ago that the island as a jurisdiction was trading fairly frequently with Russia, and now we wouldn't be wanting to be seen to do that. Obviously, being a Reform Jersey member, I was quite keen not to be seen to be anti-finance or the loony lefty that some people may want to brand me. So I did take it upon myself to speak to some people that I knew and I trusted that worked within the financial services industry to kind of get their take and their advice on what this treaty might mean. It actually surprised me, because some of them actually didn't know what it would mean for the sector. They couldn't explain to me why it was necessarily a good thing. And actually, thinking ahead of this debate, I'm actually quite surprised that Jersey Finance hasn't sought to contact members ahead of the debate, perhaps to explain to us what the importance to the sector is of this particular treaty as well, to add their weight to this. And I would like to invite the ministers present, unfortunately, because I'm not in the chamber, I can't see who is there, but I would like to invite a minister perhaps to address some of the concerns I have. One of the concerns that was also raised with me was that since Deputy Gorst originally signed this treaty, the UAE has itself been grey listed, and a concern was brought to me that actually, what would that actually put our own money evaluation at risk if we were seen to be enacting a treaty with a grey listed country at this particular point in time. So all of those concerns and questions I have, and I would like ministers to address those. But I would like to thank Deputy Mezek for bringing this proposition. I think it really is important that we do have a better process in place, and that we also understand that our jurisdiction is different to some of those other jurisdictions that have a negative consent process in place. And that is why I will be supporting Part B of this proposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, Ma'am. Just briefly, I'm pleased to follow the previous speaker, because Deputy Feltham made some very good points there and my concerns. And I too have a concern, with Part A. Sorry, I want to get a cramp in my leg. I have a concern with Part A, but can accept Part B, because it's the sort of thing we have to do in this assembly. And one of the things I looked at, I always try to do some research and think about some background about these things. And you can research human rights issues in countries all over the world. And I say this when we've only just had individual filing of tax for men and women. So we have to look at ourselves as well. But if you look at Human Rights Watch World Report from 2022, there are some real concerns that are raised. Now, you have to judge yourself as to whether an organisation like that and that report is valid. But I would like to quote from that report and say some of the things. Some provisions of the law regulating personal status matters discriminate against women. For women to marry, her male guardian must conclude her marriage contract. Men can universally divorce their wives, whereas a woman must apply for a court in order to obtain a divorce. A woman can lose her right to maintenance if, for example, she refuses to have sexual relations with her husband without a lawful excuse. There is also the criminalisation of same-sex activity, and trans people may face prosecution under the Federal Penal Code 1987, just for a few things. Now, we've had the rights of women mentioned quite rightly in this Assembly, and next Wednesday is International Women's Day. And I would ask what damage this does to our reputation as an Assembly, as a liberal, forward-thinking Assembly, when we are going to enter a treaty with a country that does not reach those standards. And I also agree with something that Deputy Taddy said. Obviously, he put it a lot better than I can, because he's a bit of a wordsmith, when he mentioned that do these conversations actually go on? There's difficult conversations about the rights of people within a country. Do they go on when we're having these treaties? And if they don't go on, why don't they? Because we are representing the people of Jersey when we enter into these treaties. So I have real concerns about entering into these agreements with jurisdictions that don't do this. And those people who have sat here in this Assembly in the past and talked so much about the rights of women, and so rightly as well, about equity. And we talk about equity. It's a theme, I believe, of International Women's Day is equity. Well, let's look ahead to that, shall we? And let's think about what we're agreeing to. So I just ask members to think really carefully and do their research before they vote for Part A, but I will certainly support Part B because it is the right thing for us to do, as this Assembly should be paramount on this island. Thank you, Ma'am.
Thank you, Mum. I welcome the calling for the development of ratification process in Part B. It is important that there is transparency and accountability in trade or investment negotiations, as there does have impact on local communities and domestic companies, and it would be important to develop that understanding going forward. I have some experience working in this area, working for a number of years monitoring the EU International Trade Committee, specifically focusing on the EPAs, the Euro Economic Partnership Agreements, which were trade agreements between the EU and Africa, Caribbean, Pacific countries and regions. I focused on ensuring sustainable development chapters were strong, concerning the need to ensure strong environmental and labour standards, but also pushing for mechanisms for parliamentary scrutiny, offering for capacity building to help that type of scrutiny, because these are often very technical issues, and the provision for civil society and public consultation, and ensuring that these would be developed in these different countries in Africa, Caribbean and Pacific. There were many times that I witnessed where the negotiations tried to water any number of these issues down, and it was the European Parliament that made sure that these principles were kept in place. It is also important when we're looking at how to the process of ratification that we look wider than our closest neighbour. Please do remember that the UK has not been responsible for trade policy for the last 40 years, so they probably also do need to update their procedures for negotiating and ratifying their own trade agreements. Because to date, the government has not taken steps to update their procedure, precisely because of what Deputy Tadier pointed out earlier. Bilateral investment treaties are agreements between two governments designed to promote investment flows and protect international investors and their investments. They offer investors a range of protection, including against unfair or inequitable treatment and expropriation. These protections are enforced via a mechanism called the Investor-to-State Dispute Settlement, which allows companies to sue governments if a policy or its implementation negatively impacts the profitability of their investment. In the past, BITs are heavily biased in favour of international investors, challenging governments' ability to decide policy in areas like health, energy, water and climate change. BITs offer foreign investors wide-ranging rights that go beyond anything that is offered either to domestic companies or citizens. An example of this that has hindered climate change policy is the Energy Charter Treaty, which I've mentioned in this Assembly before. But luckily, in recent years, it has become more transparent and mainstream knowledge after many years of activists calling out that there were concerns of these type of mechanisms where secret court cases were heard. I would hope, therefore, that Jersey's stance going forward would have a more balanced approach where these mechanisms were to be put in place. Because the Energy Charter Treaty, for example, were used by corporations that operate oil fields gas pipelines and coal-fired power plants to launch legal cases against states that pass legislation to fight climate change and curb CO2 emissions. 74% of ECT cases involve an EU investor against an EU country. Because they have been secret, countries have been unable to tell the citizens that they have been unable to move on their climate commitments because they have been in active court cases and have had to pay out billions in compensation. Again, I hope Jersey will take these examples into consideration as they develop these type of mechanisms going forward. But ultimately, investment treaties is about companies doing business. Therefore, I think it's important to send a signal to these companies that they should adhere to human rights as stated in the 2011 UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights, known as the Ruggie Principles, which set out guidelines for states and companies to prevent, address and remedy human rights abuses committed in business operations. Businesses have an independent responsibility to respect human rights, which means that it exists irrespective of whether states are living up to their commitments. The roles of states and business are clearly distinguished in the framework. Businesses' responsibilities remain even where states fail to carry out their duties. Although particular countries and local contexts may affect the human rights risks of enterprises, activities and business relationships, all business enterprises have the same responsibility to respect human rights wherever they operate. And therefore, I urge the Jersey finance sector to adopt, implement and publicly state that they follow the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights as part of these bilateral investment treaties and discussions around this going forward. Thank you.
Conataba St Mary.
Thank you, ma'am. I only have two brief points to make. First of all, this particular agreement has been in the offing for some considerable time, and whilst I appreciate that the present Economic Scrutiny Panel has had a briefing on it, my memory serves me correctly, the previous one did as well. And I also well recall that at that stage the panel did jar slightly at the approach, because at that stage the UAE had refused to sign the UN resolution condemning the invasion of Russia, and that caused us some problem. Is this quite right? Is this a jurisdiction with which we should be dealing? And it came to our attention partly because I think the Minister required some comfort from us as to the next step, and we did raise a point on that. And we got a reply to the effect that well, two things. First of all, I think subsequent to that, the UAE did condemn the invasion, which helped us somewhat. And I think the UK were fully aware of our stance and saw no reason why we should not, which does go back to our position within the UK as far as international policy is concerned. So the point I'm really raising, ma'am, is the fact that I would expect any future agreement coming through would go through scrutiny in the first place, and soundings could well be taken then as to where we were in the overall context, rather than being put on us last minute. That said, having heard some of the speeches this morning, I shall be supporting the proposition. I am concerned that some members will use it as an opportunity to question any government's policy on a whole question of things. Even our allies are not immune from criticism on various things. And I do urge members to take that into account when we look what is before us. It is an investment treaty and not a condemnation of their overall policy. And the second very brief point, sir, is Deputy Palish has asked the Legislation Advisory Panel to bring this forward. He is Vice Chair, I am Chair. I am sure that at our meeting on Friday we will adopt that, and I'm very happy to take the necessary measures. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Conataba. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm only going to really address Deputy Tadier's question, and which is relevant to Part A of the proposition. I think there's been enough discussion about B and the desirability or not of the States Assembly ratifying treaties and that particular mechanism. The question that was raised was, would a business person in the States Assembly enter into business with someone in the UAE. And I think this kind of this relates to a different debate and probably perhaps a different proposition, because who in the UAE? Might I be talking about
Would the member give way?
Yeah, okay, sure.
Sorry, Deputy Tadia, are you wanting to make a point of clarification?
Just to clarify what I said, I didn't ask whether a business person would do business with someone in the UAE. I was asking about whether a business person might do trade with somebody with certain values that they fundamentally disagreed with. Say somebody that's what I was making. I didn't make any assertion as to where that person might come from. Just to clarify, as an analogy.
So it was a different question.
Thank you, Deputy.
Okay.
You didn't give me an opportunity to ask Deputy Scott if she was willing to give way, but I know if you'd like to continue, Deputy Scott.
So why would, I think there is a danger of ideology muddying the waters here, because when you actually think about some of the people who actually are resident in the UAE, you can be talking about former clients of UK banks who live overseas. You could be talking about some of the employees of those banks. And some of these people no longer may wish to invest in the UK. And those banks, of which we have many subsidiaries, might even suggest that Jersey's regarded as an alternative choice. And if not Jersey, where not? Oh, maybe a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands, maybe a subsidiary somewhere else. So what we're really talking about is should business be sent away on the basis that there could be, it may facilitate some sort of investment from someone in the UAE into Jersey. And I do think if you're going to actually ask that question, ask it honestly, have that debate. Don't use this sort of mechanism to say, right, we shouldn't have them because we don't quite agree with what they're doing. Because why didn't you actually say, well, hang on, the UK's got a treaty with them, let's not deal with the UK. In fact, the UK, only a few years ago, had the most terrible reputation in terms of dealing with Russian oligarchs, much worse than Jersey. Why didn't Reform come and make some sort of stand against that? So I think there is a very complex argument about who should we be dealing with and who shouldn't we be dealing with in terms of jurisdictions here, which, and I really think, I can't instantly, I'm not going to instantly go in the rights and wrongs of that, but at the end of the day, it's a simple matter about the extent to which with the finance industry, if it has a product, well, whether it should have this particular kite mark. And let's just talk a bit about the finance industry and some of the rules and regulations that it has to deal with in marketing products. I remember when I was actually working in there years ago, there was some sort of rule that certain funds needed to be in certain jurisdictions had to have a company that was 2 years old and yet at the same time have a completely clean transaction history. And Jersey didn't actually do shelf companies, it still doesn't. So it was a particular hurdle that had to be jumped. There was a way in which a solution was found that companies were actually seasoned at the registry. It was a pragmatic one, but it was a rule. The kite mark that we're talking about in terms of BIT doesn't actually change anything that we do. It's simply saying so much as saying, okay, we do agree with things fairly. We do recognise public international law, and we agree to actually do that. We're not really sort of bending over backwards to change ourselves. But what it is basically doing is producing a kite mark. Yes, and I very much thank the Constable of St Mary as the former chair of the Economic and International Affairs Panel of explaining a bit of the history by which this particular treaty has been scrutinised by the panel. And more recently, the Economic and International Affairs Panel did have a briefing. Some of the things that we have questioned as a result of the some sort of issues raised by at least one member have been things about the application of Sharia law. Well, no, we're talking about public international law. We've been talking this point that's been mentioned about grey listing. We actually asked a specific point about that, about the UAE and the grey listing, and have been assured that that wouldn't actually impact on the money foul assessment. So I will assure the States Assembly that we have looked into this. I personally, because of the fact that this is a kite marking exercise, which actually nearly all jurisdictions will do. One example that I've actually used has been Spain, and yes, it has got it's got a socialist prime minister who entered into a BIT with Saudi Arabia to save its car industry. I don't know how much you want of a finance industry, but these are all the things that you need to take into the mix. Maybe ultimately you would rather it go away, but it would be good to have something to take its place. Anyway, I will be voting for the whole proposition, and I would suggest that members who do want to sort of cherry pick here think very carefully about the consequences. Thank you.
Does any member wish to speak?
Ma'am, I'm not sure how many other speakers there are. I would wish to seek to address some of the questions that members have raised before Senator before Deputy Mezek sums up. I don't know whether members would like us to continue.
I don't have anybody else listed, Deputy. I don't know if members would like to indicate if they intend speaking so that we have an idea of anybody else who wishes to participate. It's just you then, Deputy Post.
Okay, that means I hope I've got permission to be relatively brief, Ma'am. I wanted to start by saying, obviously I'm standing on behalf of the Minister, and members understand why he's not in the Assembly today. I'd like to thank Deputy Mezek for his engagement and his desire, as other members have said, for the Assembly to give due consideration not only to this treaty, but treaties that might be entered into or extended in the future. And that is why I am also grateful for Senator Balash and his proposal that going forward, the issue of rightful and appropriate ratification by the Assembly and the involvement in a wide range of treaties should be considered in slower time, and that's why I have no disagreement with that amendment to B. I think it will allow that work to be undertaken so that we can arrive at a satisfactory situation which rightly respects Jersey's constitutional position, but also I hope will enhance through that process our autonomy, and therefore I'm grateful for the involvement there. I'm also grateful to the scrutiny panel. I just heard the Chair's intervention. I am grateful to her for that intervention, and of course the comments issued by PPC, which to some extent started the work that the Legislation Advisory Panel will now pick up and continue. There have been a number of questions asked during this debate, and I want to start on the premise that bilateral investment treaties, we were given quite a nice detailed summarisation from the Assistant Minister, and I'm also grateful for her engagement at the end of last week with her vast experience, but obviously from a European parliamentary and lobbying perspective. But they do, as she said, at the highest level, they're designed to protect, promote and liberalise cross-border investment. And members know that Jersey has a strong and healthy business relationship with the UAE and also at governmental and diplomatic level, and therefore it is appropriate that the UAE is the first country, because of that strong business relationship, that this agreement should be signed, and that this Assembly today should ask the Minister to go ahead and complete the ratification process. I remind, Ma'am, the Assembly that Jersey is the first Crown dependency to have entrustment from the United Kingdom to enter into a bilateral investment treaty in its own right, and that is something I think that we should be proud of, and it is something that I hope the Assembly would wish to support and to continue to support the Minister in doing that as he and his officials seek to negotiate these agreements in the future. And members hopefully can see from the bilateral investment treaty, which follows modern processes and therefore doesn't have all of the pitfalls that Deputy Jean was talking about, that history has. Rather, I think we can be quite proud of the agreement that was negotiated. It was a negotiation. Parties to negotiation don't always get the words included that they would wish, and many members today have spoken about human rights, and perhaps that's an area where members would have wished and will wish to see in the future stronger wording around that. And I know that the Minister is extremely keen on ensuring that as well, and there are some bilateral investment treaties which are in negotiation, which I think will very much meet the requirements of the Assembly. But when it comes to matters of employment practice, there's some good strong words in that agreement around appropriate employment practices and also environmental protections as well. And so for those members who have cast doubt upon whether, I think they were referring to during the negotiations, whether these issues are raised during negotiations, well, of course they are, because there is a negotiation about the wordings that will be included. And in the treaty that was signed in 2021, there are those environmental protections and there are those employment protections, and they were negotiated and debated in those negotiations. That, of course, is wholly separate to, of course, to conversations that ministers will have in bilateral minister-to-minister engagement, in bilateral minister-to-ambassador engagement, in bilateral engagement between minister and officials. And those issues are also raised in those conversations. Another member, Ma'am, questioned whether now was the right time in light of the UAE's grey listing by FATF. And what I would say in that regard is that we know that when another jurisdiction is grey listed, then other jurisdictions that comply with FATF requirements have to put enhanced procedures in place. And that, of course, is how Jersey rightly deals with jurisdictions who have been grey listed, and those enhanced procedures have been put in place by industry and by the regulator to guard against any difficulties in that regard. It is not a rationale for not going ahead and completing the ratification of this bilateral investment treaty. In fact, this bilateral investment treaty gives further protections to those who might be using it for investment purposes. So bilateral investment treaty helps to protect Jersey investors who are already operating in the UAE by guaranteeing routes to independent international arbitration, and that is an additional right that currently doesn't exist. And I would suggest that alone is a reason for members asking and agreeing to Part A to complete the ratification processes moving forward. I won't, because time doesn't allow, go into all of the legal and technical niceties around ratification and where that rightly sits with the executive, simply to say that the minister did propose a mechanism which was advised to him that was appropriate because of the wording of the entrustment letter in this process, and therefore he has followed the process that was advised to him. But I do think it is helpful for members to have this engagement and have the ability today to positively say to the minister that he should complete the ratification process. And I would just say, as the Constable of St Mary said, if members today follow the advice of Deputy Messick, they're perfectly legitimate democratic right to do that, and it is a good forum to raise the issues which has been raised, and I make no criticism of those who've raised those issues, but I would just reiterate what the Constable said, that if the Assembly decide that the Minister shouldn't go ahead and complete those ratification processes on this particular treaty, then I fear that we will be in a mess as an Assembly. It would be difficult for the Minister and officials to argue that they can negotiate in good faith as a trusted partner. And what we think is a great benefit and enhances Jersey's international reputation and constitutional autonomy by signing bilateral investment treaties bilaterally, rather than having to have the UK's bilateral investment treaties extended to them. I think that will create a great difficulty for the government going forward, and I don't think that it is something that members would want to do. Rather, I think it will be far preferable to say, yes, we agree with Part A as now amended, Minister should get on and complete that process, and then we will work together as an Assembly with colleagues to bring forward a process or processes which are, as I say, appropriate for various types of international treaty and how they're extended to Jersey. And therefore, Ma'am, I ask members to support the bringing into force the UAE bilateral investment treaty, and those who might be wobbling for all good reason, I ask them to think very carefully about the implications if they are to vote against the completion of the ratification process, because I think it will have unintended consequences with partners of Jersey around the globe. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Deputy Gorse. I do have an eye on the time. Of course, we have gone beyond the time when we would normally adjourn. It's a matter for members whether they wish to propose the adjournment now or propose to continue and to allow Deputy Messick to make his summing up speech and the vote on it.
I'm registered to speak, Ma'am.
Do you wish to? Well, no, I have nobody else wishing to speak.
I'd like to propose we try and get this finished before lunch. Thank you.
Is that proposition seconded? Members content to continue the debate until completion? Would like to show? Those against? Then we will continue. If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and I call on Deputy Messick to respond.
Thank you, ma'am. And I think the final parts of Deputy Gorse's speech make clear what the UAE bilateral investment treaty is to this Assembly. It's a fait accompli. That is essentially his argument. We've done all this work. Don't you worry about it. We've done it. It's before the Assembly because of another member's doing not as, but you've got no choice. You've got to support it. I call that taking members for granted, and that should not be an argument that ministers pursue. This treaty was pursued without explicit support or approval from this Assembly. We are entitled to have views that don't align with the Minister on it, and if we want to say thanks but no thanks, we're completely within our rights to do so. And whatever risks the Minister may claim there will be to Jersey in the future, in terms of our prospects of negotiating other treaties with other countries, well, I would hope in those instances, the government would do the honest thing, which would be to explain why a previous treaty was rejected and take the blame for it, for not pursuing it properly and for not putting the correct emphasis that would have the democratic support of our democratically elected chamber. Although I have to say, with these types of countries that they'll be looking to do treaties with, talking about democracy will be something those partners probably won't understand, because most of them aren't democracies. In many of those countries, you're not allowed to even elect the president of your local golf club in case the idea catches on. They have such poor human rights and such bad regard for that. So, so for what it's worth, from my perspective, I do not want to see my island home associate in these ways with these countries with such poor records. Deputy Gorst actually, when talking about the treaty that's already been negotiated, he said it was something we could be proud of. Not me. I won't be proud of that. I'm proud of many things about my island home. I'm proud of our community spirit. I'm proud of our natural beauty and the great care that so many of us pay towards our island. I certainly won't be proud at an undemocratic attempt from government to pursue closer relations with a country which most people on this island have little regard for, and when an objective examination is taken of their human rights records and the economic role they play in the world, most people would be appalled by that. He and I have different understandings of what the word proud means. And it's because of the shame, in fact, I would feel from these undemocratic advances for closer relations with countries with such terrible human rights records, then I would not want to partake in this treaty. I would say to the ministers, no thank you. You can build the new process for negotiating and ratifying treaties, and we can, as an assembly, democratically come to conclusions on those on a case-by-case basis, and if we don't like them, we can say no to them. I would be interested in understanding how many members of this assembly have read the Bilateral Investment Treaty. I won't embarrass members by asking for a show of hands or anything, but it was presented relatively late in the day. Despite the fact it's been in the works for years, should we be proactively voting for something when many of us, as representatives of our constituents, probably don't know a lot about it either? Let's not accept these fait accomplis which present things to the Assembly, taking us for granted and assuming that we'll just rubber stamp whatever they say, whether or not it's in line with our values and our aspirations for our island community. So I have no hesitation in voting no to the implementation of that treaty. Deputy Gorst said that the grey listing of the UAE, the Financial Action Task Force, was not a rationale for rejecting the treaty, but it surely must be. If you're promoting more business activity and more investment with a country that's just been grey listed, you are inevitably increasing your chances of your fingerprints ending up on that somehow. And that's something I don't wish for Jersey to partake in. During the course of this debate, I've been online and attempted to search for articles from various organisations examining the UAE's record in many of these things. And there are just so many of them, it's difficult to even single out one to point out to the Assembly. How many Russian oligarchs have loads of money and property interests in these countries? And their attitude to the wider conflict not being necessarily the same as ours on this. It's just too close for comfort, as far as I'm concerned. I will only very briefly address the point made by Deputy Scott about apparently us cherry-picking on this. But I'm happy to say that I'm very proud of the record that I have and that my party has in speaking out against Russian money before it was fashionable to do so. And when we spoke out against the outrageous granting of 2-1E status to a high-profile Russian oligarch several years ago, we were lonely voices in doing that. And it's actually a sad thing that unfortunately history has had to vindicate us on that. And there are points of principle which we ought to stick to, and that is that you don't closely associate and glorify people who are involved in things that are dodgy, because eventually it comes back to bite you. Ma'am, part B of this proposition, it appears, is not controversial, and if all goes to plan, there will be a process put in place in future that gives this Assembly a greater say in how these treaties are negotiated and approved, and that in the future will be an opportunity for us to indicate to the government that they probably shouldn't waste their time pursuing certain treaties if they won't have the support of this Assembly, and that will hopefully be constructive. But there is no reason that a treaty that hasn't gone through a process that is democratic and transparent should just be accepted because, oh, that's just where we are today, that this has been in the pipeline for a long time. We've been taken for granted on it, and we should say no thank you to the government for that treaty. And in doing so, those of us who are going to vote against Part A, I'm sure will do so, trying to keep our consciences clear that we're not seeking to associate with a regime with an appalling human rights record, and one, when it comes to their financial investments from around the world, has a dodgy record that we shouldn't be associating with and should not be exposing our economy to risk of by promoting greater investment at this point. So, ma'am, I will ask that vote to be taken in two parts on this proposition, and for members to vote against Part A, but in favour of Part B.
You call for the appel then, Deputy? Deputy Messick, sorry, you call for the appel on both of those. What did I say? Yeah. Ask for the vote, but yeah. Very well, Greffier. If I ask members to return to their seats, and I ask the Greffier to open the voting on Part A of the proposition. All members have had an opportunity
I'm having trouble voting, sorry, can I...
We've got it, apparently, Deputy.
Okay, I'll do it. Sorry, thank you, I was panicking there.
If all members have had an opportunity to cast their votes, I'll ask the Greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that Part A has been adopted. There were 30 votes pour, 15 votes contre, and 2 abstentions.
Could we have the against, the contre and the abstentions, please, ma'am?
Those voting against, Greffier.
Those members voting contre, the Connétable of St Helier, St Martin, Grouville and St Juan, and deputies Southern, Lehegara, Rob Ward, Messick, Coles, Ore, Catherine Curtis, Kovac and Andrews, and the members, deputies Tadier and Feltham, and the members who abstained, the Connétable of St Lawrence and Deputy Alex Curtis.
Very well. Then we move to the vote on paragraph B of the proposition. I'll ask the Greffier to open the voting. If all members have an opportunity to cast their vote, I'll ask Greffier to close the voting. paragraph B has been adopted, 47 votes pour, no votes contre. That concludes public business for this meeting, and therefore I invite the Chair of PPC to propose the arrangement of public business for future meetings.
Thank you, ma'am. The arrangement of public business, draft sanctions and asset freezing, Amendment 3, Jersey Law P4 2023, is the only legislation listed on the order paper for our next sitting. Since the order paper was published, the Conotab of St Helier has lodged development of Town Master Plan P9 2023, and this has been listed for the next meeting. Therefore, we only have 2 propositions listed for the sitting on March the 21st. If no more legislation comes forward for debate on the 21st, we may only need 1 day. However, please be aware that continuation days may be needed. Thank you.
Ma'am, please may I just draw members' attention to an invitation that's been sent to us all from the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force. It's in 2 weeks' time. It was the information session for States members, and it's really important that as many members as possible attend, and you'll have a chance to give your views as well. So I'd be grateful if members could have a look at that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Doublé. If no members have anything else to add, then the States stand adjourned until Tuesday, the 21st of March.